it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Now, my dear friends, here's my traditional little teaser to get you excited for tonight's story. You ready? Okay then. In the dying town of Arthur's Wake, a forgotten backwater settlement in the heart of New England, a strange fog rolls in without warning. With it comes whispers of something watching from the darkness. When children begin vanishing and eerie figures are seen lurking beyond the mist, two brothers find themselves drawn toward an abandoned house at the edge of town, a place tied to secrets no one dares speak aloud. But within the fog awaits something ancient, something patient and hungry, and once it sees you, well, it may never let you leave. A Figure in the Fog by Michael Landry. The town of Arthur's Wake was dying. At least that's what Jamie's dad always said. The man tended to wax philosophical when he was drunk, which was often. Jamie would silently sit at the dinner table and listen to the man ramble on about things and how they'd been different when he'd been growing up. How back then an honest day's work actually got you something. Jamie's mother would sit quietly at the other end of the table from his father, saying nothing, gaze firmly fixed on an empty space 6 inches in front of her face, only stirring to refill plates or glasses or to clear the dishes. Many days her unmoving, hollow eyes were ringed with various shades of purple and yellow. On those they weren't, the bruises were simply hiding, concealing themselves in places less visible. Once last year, his father had been in a particularly black drunk state. Profits at the factory were down. Rumour had it that the foreman would be releasing a handful of workers by the end of the week, and Jamie's dad reckoned he might be one of them. Jamie had lain in the bedroom he shared with his brother, staring at the ceiling for as long as he was able, tears quietly streaming down his face, listening to the shouts through the thin walls, accompanied by heavy thumps and soft moans. Finally, unable to bear the sounds any more, he got out of bed and retrieved his Little League bat from where it rested in the corner. He made it to the door when he felt a small hand tug on his pajama sleeve. "Jamie, don't go, Jamie." "Shut up, Lester." No, Jamie, don't leave me. Get off." "Jamie, he'll hurt you." "Get off me. Go and hide in the closet if you're scared." No. Jamie pulled his sleeve from Lester's grip and gave him a slight shove, enough to knock him back onto the bed. The little boy sat there, pitifully sobbing as Jamie slipped through the door. Noiselessly, he crept down the hallway towards the living room, holding the bat cocked the way his coach had taught him. Jamie carefully poked his head around the corner, eyes growing wide at the scene that unfolded before him. His father stood in the middle of the room, a half-empty beer can in one hand, his belt in the other. His mother cowered in the far corner, hands held feebly in front of her, one eye already swollen shut. A red rage overtook Jamie, the emotion more powerful than anything he'd felt in his young life. In that moment, he made the decision to kill his father. He held his breath, stalking ever closer as the man took a long pull from his drink. Whether he was warned by the slight widening of his wife's good eye, or through some devilish intuition, Jamie's father turned just as Jamie raised his weapon. Screaming in anger and frustration, Jamie swung as hard as he could, only to have the bat plucked from his hands as easily as a child pulling the wings off a fly. "You little shit." The slap hit Jamie hard enough to see stars, his head snapping backwards, and he stumbled against the wall. The next blow crushed the air from his chest, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. "Think you're man enough to take a swing at me, huh?" Jamie tasted blood and heard a dull crack when his father kicked him in the ribs. He curled into a ball as the blows continued to fall. See how you like a taste of your own medicine, boy." Jamie raised his arm to defend himself as the bat came down, smashing against his forearm. He screamed as he felt the bone snap. "Don't, huh? Well, we're just getting started." Jamie's eyes widened in terror as his father raised the bat above his head, ready to deliver a crushing blow. But suddenly, his mother was there, pinning Jamie to the ground, shielding him with her own body. "Frank, you fucking animal. He's your own son." "Get out of the way, whore. The boy's gonna learn." "You're gonna have to kill me first. Go ahead and do it. Then enjoy being locked up for the rest of your miserable life, you piece of shit." "You think I won't?" "I know you won't. You don't have the balls." For a moment, Jamie thought he'd do it, the bat wavering ever so slightly as his father's eyes narrowed in drunken rage. Then he lowered the bat and turned his back on the huddled pair. "You fucking bitch." He walked across the room to where the television blared loudly and dropped into an easy chair, tossing the bat into the corner. His mother slowly got to her feet. "He needs to go to the hospital, Frank." "Then fucking take him." She helped Jamie up. "Get yourself to the car and lock yourself in, baby. I'll get your brother and meet you there." They drove to the hospital in silence, save for Lester's quiet sniffles from the back seat. Jamie's arm had to be set and put in a cast. The break was clean, so the doctor assured them it would heal without any issues. They also tightly wrapped his chest in medical tape, though fortunately his ribs were just cracked and bruised, not broken. Jamie lay lightly dozing in a hospital bed, Lester curled up under his unbroken arm, fast asleep, while his mother spoke softly to a woman in the hallway. They talked for a while, ever so often shooting concerned glances at him through the doorway. Finally, his mother came into the room and gently sat down next to him. "Who's that lady, Mom?" "Oh, no one, honey. She's just worried about how you got your injuries, and how I got mine." "Why'd you tell her?" "What I had to." Jamie grit his teeth in frustration. "Why do you stay with him, Mom? We could leave." His mother smiled sadly. "Well, you'll understand someday. Now you have to promise me something. No matter what happens, never try to do what you did tonight again." But I mean it, Jamie. I'd die if anything happened to you or your brother. I can take care of myself. You just have to trust me, baby." Lying there in the dark, feeling the slow rise and fall of his brother's chest as he softly snored beside him, Jamie lied to his mother for the first and only time in his life. "All right, Mom. I promise." A nurse came in and adjusted a knob on one of the tubes leading into his arm. Jamie felt his eyelids grow heavy as his mother stroked his forehead. "That's my brave boy. My brave, beautiful boy." Well, Jamie thought to himself as he drifted to sleep, it might not really be a lie. I said I wouldn't try again. Next time, I just have to succeed. Jamie had slowly healed over the coming weeks. His arm itched under the cast, but the worst part was his cracked ribs ached constantly and sent sharp pains running through his side whenever he took a deep breath. One night he lay in bed fitfully trying to get comfortable, when the dark shape of his father loomed over him from the doorway. Terrified, he remained absolutely still, feigning sleep. To his surprise, the man sat down next to him, quietly weeping. "Oh, my boy, I am so sorry." He stayed there for several minutes, Jamie trying desperately not to gasp from the pain radiating from his ribs. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" Jamie's mother stood in the doorway. No, you don't get to feel sorry for this. You don't get to touch him. Please, Mary. Don't you fucking dare. You are not his father, not after what you did. If you touch either of them again, for any reason, I'm leaving you, Frank. And I'm taking them with me. Now, get out." Shoulders hunched, his father stumbled from the room, closing the door behind him. It was a long time before Jamie managed to fall asleep. Since then, Jamie had been waiting for an opportunity to kill his father. He'd come close a few times, evenings when his father would be passed out in front of the TV, a line of drool slowly dripping down his chin. But something always held him back. Jamie told himself it was a promise he'd made to his mother, but the small, honest part of his mind knew it was because he was afraid. He still remembered the pain. And for his father's part, he hadn't touched Jamie or Lester since that night. It probably helped that somehow he'd managed to avoid the layoffs at the factory. And certainly he still got drunk regularly, and on many occasions would slap his wife around. But things never got quite as bad as that time, and there was less shouting involved now. The abuse had become almost a casual action, done out of reflex rather than emotion. Jamie's anger had cooled from the burning rage it was when he made the decision to kill his father, to a low, calculating heat. He was patient, and he watched, knowing that someday he would have his moment. Until then, Jamie spent his evenings numbly sitting at the dinner table, listening to his drunk of a father go on about the good old days. Lester at least seemed to be oblivious to the dark undercurrents in the house. Even now the 8-year-old was making faces across the table at Jamie, trying to get him to laugh. Jamie thought about trying to kick him under the table, but decided not to. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. This town's going to hell, I tell you. His father spoke between bites of a roast. Unemployment through the roof. Homeless bums passed out on every other street corner. He took a swig of beer. Oh, don't even get me started about all the disappearing kids. That little Fontaine girl's the latest one, last week. Her dad stopped by the factory today, out of his goddamn mind. Jamie felt a hollow pit appear in his stomach as his mind registered what his father had just said. He spoke up, without thinking. What? Morgan's missing? Huh? His father frowned. Oh, not Morgan, the other one. The sister, Claire. Relief washed over Jamie, quickly followed by shame. He'd known Morgana Fontaine for years. The first day of second grade, another boy had pulled on her raven black braid, and Jamie had shoved him away. Morgan, needing no one to fight her battles for her, turned and punched the boy in the nose. Sitting next to each other in the school office, waiting to see the principal, they quietly joked about the open-mouthed, gaping look the boy had on his face as he sat on the ground trying to contemplate what had just happened. And they'd been friends ever since, and for the last year or so, Jamie had felt his feelings toward her changing towards something deeper than friendship. Her sister Claire was about the same age as Lester. Jamie knew the girl, certainly. He often walked the sisters home after school, with Lester dragging his feet behind them. But Jamie was really only there to spend time with Morgan. The emotions he felt about her weren't well defined as of yet, but something in his stomach had heaved in the brief moment he thought she was missing. His relief that she wasn't was offset by the knowledge that she would surely be devastated by Claire's disappearance. Neither girl had been in school for the last 2 days, and this explained why. Mom, may I be excused, please? She hadn't finished her nod before Jamie was halfway out of the door. The Fontaine's house was only a few streets down, and he could be there in minutes. He meant to go see Morgan before now, but the thought of the dark looks her mother always gave him whenever he walked the girls home had warded him off from showing up uninvited. Back before dark, boy, his father yelled after him. Oh, you'll be the next one on the side of a milk carton. He'd gone 3 blocks when he heard a high-pitched voice calling his name from behind him. Jamie! Jamie, wait for me! He turned and saw Lester running as fast as his legs would carry him. Jamie stopped and waited for him to catch up. He arrived, panting, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Jamie frowned. What do you think you're doing, Sprout? Mom said I could go with you. Claire's my friend, too. Yeah, well, maybe I don't feel like having you tag along. Well, Mom said I had to stick with you. If you didn't want me to come, you had to walk me back home. Jamie ground his teeth. Fine, but you stay right with me and do what I say, got it? Lester nodded seriously. Right, first things first. Keep your mouth shut. But What'd I just say? Mouth shut or I walk you home. It won't take that long to drop you off. Lester grudgingly nodded again, his excitement about being allowed to come somewhat tempered. Good. Now, let's go. They continued down the street and made the turn into Blackwood Drive, reaching the Fontaines a few minutes later. Walking up the steps with Lester close on his heels, Jamie knocked firmly on the door. Half turning back towards the road as he waited, Jamie's eyes fell on the dilapidated building a little farther down the street, as they often did when he walked Morgan home. Oh, it must have been really something back in its day, what with its massive stone walls and windows, enormous garden and high iron fence. But the wicker house had been abandoned for more than 40 years now. The walls were dirty and the windows broken, the garden so overgrown it more closely resembled a jungle, and the fence was mottled with rust. The wicked spikes jutting on top of the posts still looked plenty sharp, though. Jamie felt an involuntary shiver crawl down his spine. People said the place was haunted, and it was easy to see why, even in the daylight. Quick steps approached from inside the house, and Jamie turned back just as the door swung open. Mrs. Fontaine stood there, a tissue held in one hand and her eyes tinged with red. It was obvious she'd been crying. "Good evening, Mrs. Fontaine. We heard about Claire. We were just hoping we could see Morgana." Jamie always was careful to use Morgan's full name around her mother. Morgan hated it, but her mother was especially particular in that regard. "We're, terribly sorry about what's happened." Lester nodded solemnly next to him, so far continuing to obey the order to keep his mouth shut. For a moment, Jamie was afraid the woman would slam the door in their faces and send them packing, but then she bent over and swept both of them up in a hug. Of course, boys, come in. It's a trying time, and Morgana needs her friends to help her through this. She's upstairs." "Thank you, ma'am." Lester followed closely as Jamie went up the stairs and down the hallway to Morgan's room. He knocked lightly and waited a moment. All was quiet. He knocked again and called softly through the door. "Morgan? It's Jamie. I've got Lester with me. We came to see you." There was a moment of silence before she answered. "Go away, Jamie." Her response from within was muffled through the door. "I don't want to see anyone." "Oh, come on, don't be like that. Even your mom said we should come up. And you know how she usually feels about me even standing out on your porch." "Please, Morgan," Lester piped up from beside him. "We heard about Claire. My daddy told us she's missing. We just want to make sure you're okay." Jamie glared down at his brother and briefly considered tweaking him on the ear before he heard movement on the other side of the door. After a brief scrabbling at the handle, it creaked open a few inches and Morgan peered through the crack. The interior of the room was dark, and Morgan squinted into the light of the hallway. Jamie's heart lurched into his throat. She looked awful. Unlike her mother, Morgan's eyes weren't red from crying, but were bloodshot just the same. Deep circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept for the last several days, and her raven-black hair was snarled into a tangled bird's nest on top of her head. She looked thinner than normal, as if she hadn't been eating. Getting her bearings, she eyed Lester with an appraising look. "Missing her? Twerp? Is that what they're saying? That's what you think is going on?" Her laugh had a slight manic tone to it, and continued for several moments too long. Jamie and Lester exchanged a concerned glance before she finally regained control of herself. "Hey, sorry about that. I haven't slept in a few days, so you better come in before Mom changes her mind." She opened the door wider and made a sweeping gesture with her arm. Jamie walked through the door with Lester following, gripping his hand tightly. The room was a mess. It was hard to see details in the dark, but Jamie could smell the dirty clothes heaped about the room and notice piles of used dishes stacked here and there throughout. The only light came from a tiny lamp sitting on a desk at the far wall, the rest of which was strewn with old newspapers. A small leather-bound book that looked like a diary or journal lay open in the middle of the desk. Morgan retrieved the book before moving to the bed where she sat, pulling her legs up and crossing them in front of her. Jamie looked around for a place to sit, before finally settling on a relatively open spot on the floor, Lester crouching down beside him. Morgan stared at the two boys, unblinking, like a bird of prey on its perch, deciding what to do with a morsel it had just spied in the field below. Jamie tried to think of something to say, but found his mind was strangely blank. Instead, he cleared his throat in the uncomfortable silence. Finally, Morgan apparently made up her mind. "What do you know about Thomas Wicker?" she asked. "What? You mean the millionaire? The one whose old house is down the block?" "That's the one, yeah." "What do you know about him?" Jamie was confused by this line of questioning. Like I said, he was a millionaire. I think he had some oil fields or something. And he was some kind of an explorer. Had all kinds of weird stuff he did in Africa, all over the place. He built that house about 40 years ago. He had a wife, but she disappeared a few years after that. And, He trailed off. "Yes?" Her face remained blank but conveyed an air of expectation. "He killed himself," Lester whispered softly. "He killed his maid and the gardener, then he jumped out of that attic window." Jamie glared at Lester. "How the hell do you know about that, Squirt?" Lester stared at the ground. "Timmy Boyle told me the story at school, but everyone knows Jamie." Morgan's lips curved slightly up into a smile. There was no warmth in it. "That's right. Everyone knows. And everyone's wrong." She chuckled then, slightly patting the book in her lap. "This book, it has the truth. And let me tell you, boys, in this case the truth is a whole hell of a lot stranger than fiction." Jamie eyed the book skeptically. "Oh yeah? What is that thing anyway?" "This old thing?" Morgan's tone was playful, but her eyes were deadly serious. "Why, nothing less than the journal of Thomas Wicker." It took Jamie half an hour to page through the journal. He didn't read it in depth, other than a few passages Morgan had specially marked, Lester trying to lean over his shoulder the whole time. Finally, he reached the end. "Where did you find this thing?" "Where do you think? In that fucking house, buried under piles of papers up in the attic." "You went in there? Morgan, you must be crazier than he was. There's no way the stuff in this book is true. Wicker must have been insane. I mean, he was insane, remember? He killed those people who worked for him, and then he killed himself. The stuff he wrote in here is the rambling of a lunatic." Morgan scowled at him. "Yeah. How stupid do you think I am, seriously, that I'm just going to believe something that's written in an old book?" Jamie frowned. "What are you talking about? I mean, you've got more?" She rolled her eyes and got up from the bed, moving towards the desk. "Loads more. The police report from the night Wicker killed himself. News articles about his so-called wife before she mysteriously vanished. Oh, and stories. Tons and tons of stories from people claiming to have seen her after she disappeared." "Yeah, but that's nothing. Just ghost stories to frighten kids." He stopped as he saw her eyes threaten to overflow with tears. Angrily, she wiped them away. "That's what I thought too, at first. But then..." Her voice broke into a sob. Whispering, she spoke, almost to herself, her gaze fixed straight ahead, eyes staring at nothing. "It was just a dare. It was a stupid dare." Jamie felt like he'd been hit in the gut, his breath short, like the time his father had cracked his ribs. "Morgan, what did you do?" She turned to look at him. The tears had come back, and this time they ran down her face. "Oh God, Jamie, I think I killed my sister." Jamie felt the world start to spin. Morgan took a couple of moments to compose herself, and then she began. "We'd grown up listening to the stories, you know. I mean, everyone had. You'd think that maybe living down the street from the house, we'd eventually get used to it, but Well, I never did. I could never look at it without getting creeped out. I hate being scared. So finally, a couple of weeks ago, I decided to do something about it. The breath hitched in her throat before she went on. Didn't tell you, or anyone else at school, because I was afraid you'd make fun of me. Well, this just sort of became my pet project. I started at the library. Went through all the old records they had to find out everything I could about the house. Well, there's a lot. I mean, more than a lot. Wicca was basically the closest thing this town had to a celebrity back in the day, so the newspapers carried the story for weeks after he died. Hit it from every angle. The one thing they had absolutely no information on was his wife. She moved over to the desk and picked up one of the old newspapers. The only hard evidence I could find to show that she even existed for sure was this article here. She passed the paper to Jamie. The top article on the page was devoted to the Lady Wicca, recounting stories and speculations that various people around town had made about her. It was accompanied by a picture of the second story of the house, in much better condition than it currently stood, and Jamie could see the fuzzy image of a woman standing in the window, the only detail a surprising sharpness of her eyes. Finally, I got all I could out of the papers. For the amount of stories they ran after Wicca's death, they had surprisingly little actual information about him. So last week I decided I'd go inside and see if I could find anything. I figured maybe once I saw what was in there, I'd be less scared. Claire insisted on going with me. You know how little siblings are. And she looked pointedly at Lester before continuing. I really hadn't thought we'd find anything, but once we snuck in, it looked like the house hadn't been touched in all this time. Once the police completed their investigation, they just sort of closed the front door and walked away. Oh, there's so many creepy stories about the place. I think it's kept a lot of people out who would have gone through it before now. God, I wish I would have done the same. She sighed. There's still a whole bunch of weird stuff in there. Masks and statues and all sorts of things. The room the picture in the paper shows as Mrs. Wicca's has these symbols scrawled all over the walls. Eventually, we made our way up to the attic. The house is all run down, and some of the stairs were pretty rotten, but the ladder leading up to the attic was still there. I thought if I saw where he killed himself, that'd be enough to cure me of my fear. So, we went up and poked around. And that's where I found this. She tapped the journal. It was getting late, so we went back home. That's when I first started going through the book. Well, I thought the same thing you did, that Wicca must have been nuts. But the worst part was that my fear hadn't gone away. Just the opposite. All the stuff in the book made me even more afraid, even though a part of me was telling myself it had to be make-believe. Well, the next day I was talking to Claire about it. She laughed at me, said I was scared of a stupid empty house. I told her if she wasn't a scaredy cat, she should go spend an hour in Mrs. Wicca's old room at midnight. I think she was afraid, but she didn't want to admit it in front of me. You know how little siblings are. She looked at Lester again then. So last Saturday we snuck out again. That's the first day the fog really came in. We were practically on top of the house before I could see it. I offered to let Claire out of the deal, but she was insistent. Even though she was so scared, she was shaking. I told her that at least I'd lower the terms of the dare. I didn't want to be there any more than she did. All she had to do was go upstairs to the room and wave to me through the window. And then we could go home. I had to go in through the gate just to be able to see the window. Claire went up the steps and only looked back once before squeezing through the front door. God, I don't know how long I waited, standing there staring at that window, waiting for her to come. It's probably only a minute or two, but it felt like hours. Finally, I saw this figure at the window. Well, it was hard to make out through the fog, but it was definitely person-shaped. I thought it had to be Claire. I mean, what else could it be? It was there for a moment, and I could tell it was looking at me. But then it moved away from the window. I think I must have been holding my breath, because I remember I let it out then, thinking that Claire would back down in just a minute and we could leave. I'd kid her a little about not having the guts to wave to me, but in reality I was glad she was moving as quickly as she was. Well, those were the thoughts going through my head when I heard Claire calling me. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the window, waving at me clear as day, even through the fog. She had this huge smile on her face, so proud of what she'd done. Morgan choked back a sob. She was just trying to impress me, the little idiot. But I couldn't be happy for her, because I knew. She looked up at Jamie. I knew she wasn't alone in the house. I yelled at her to get down from there, to run. First she looked mad that I wasn't giving her the praise she'd expected. And then she looked scared. She had this terrified look on her little face when she finally backed away from the window. And that was the last time I saw her alive. God, I waited there, calling to her forever. I was scared that I was so loud I'd wake my parents down the street, but part of me hoped that would happen, that they'd come. Well, I should have gone in there after her, but I was just so scared. Her eyes were tearing up again now. My little sister was in trouble, and I was too big of a cow to do anything about it, Jamie. God, I must have stood there for 20 minutes just yelling her name. I never even heard anything from her. Not a scream, not a sound. Maybe if I'd heard something, knew for sure that something was happening, that would have spurred me to run in. But I didn't. I couldn't. Finally, my voice started to go hoarse, and I just sat down on the ground and started to cry. I'm not sure how long I was sitting there, sobbing, before I noticed that the fog had started to thicken even more. Suddenly I became aware of his presence. You know how sometimes you can tell someone is looking at you, even if you're not looking at them? It was like that. I looked up and couldn't make anything out 5 feet in front of me because of the fog. But even so, I could see this pair of eyes staring at me from near the front door. She shuddered. I don't know how I know this, but those eyes were happy, Jamie. Happy and hungry. I thought I'd been scared before that. I thought I'd been out of screams, but boy, I was wrong. I turned and ran so fast, it's a wonder I didn't knock myself out trying to get through the gate. Even more wonder that I managed to find my way back to my house through the fog. But I did, screaming and crying and blubbering the whole way. By that point, I'd actually managed to wake my parents up with all the noise I was making. They were at the front door when I just about collapsed on the welcome mat. It took them a while to get me calmed down enough to tell them what had happened. My dad grabbed a flashlight and headed over to the house. He searched until morning, but didn't find anything. No trace of Claire, or of what or who took her. And then he called the police. She sighed. They've had me tell them my story over and over again, hoping I could give them some clue about who took Claire, some detail. Even if I could have seen more clearly through the fog, I don't think it would have helped. Did you know there's a lot of missing kids in the wake? It's been going on for a while now, Jamie. I'll bet even longer than they think or would admit. And I'll bet it's been going on since the night Thomas Wicker threw himself out of his attic window. Since the night she got out. She opened the book on her lap and absently started to leaf through the pages. God, it's all in here. The stuff Wicker saw, that he encountered. She was one of them. That thing everyone thought was his wife. He kept her locked away up there in that room so she'd never be free. But she got free. And Wicker decided he'd rather kill himself than face what he knew she'd do once she was. She paused, blankly staring at the book. Oh, now, hang on a second, Morgan. Jamie cut in. Nothing you saw proves anything that's in the book is true. I mean, I certainly believe that you saw someone in the house, and in all likelihood, they're the one that took Claire. But there's nothing about it other than those eyes that suggests there are ghosts or demons or whatever that are responsible for this. And that could have just been your mind playing tricks on you. He's probably just some homeless guy. And they haven't found a body. Claire could still be out there. Morgan looked up, a small, sad smile on her face. Oh, Jamie, you don't get it. They won't find a body. Jamie felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand at attention. What do you mean, Morgan? How can you be so sure? 'Cause remember how I said, when she moved away from the window, that was the last time I saw her alive? I didn't say it was the last time I saw her. That's why I haven't been able to sleep. Morgan shivered slightly and took a breath. Claire comes to me every night, out of the fog. She looks at me through my window with her black, empty eyes, her hand lightly tapping on the pane like she wants to come inside. But somehow I know that's not it at all. It's not that she wants to be let in. It's that she wants me to come out. But Morgan, Lester whispered, wide-eyed, your room's on the second floor. She threw back her head and laughed. I know. Wild, isn't it? Her eyes then narrowed as she looked at Jamie with an accusing expression. So, any more bright ideas or thoughts about how crazy I am? Jamie shook his head. Have you told your parents? I mean, the police? Morgan chuckled at that. Told them what exactly? That some demon succubus stole my little sister and turned her into a monster? Come on, Jamie. You know they'd never believe that, even with the journal to back up my story. Well, you could have them stay with you. Show it to them. Already tried it. She doesn't come when other people are around. Just makes the adults give each other concerned glances when they think I'm not looking. No, I'm going to have to do this myself. Jamie's voice was almost a whisper. Do what exactly? Morgan's mouth drew into a tight, hard smile. Why? Put the bitch back in her cage, of course. Jamie only hesitated a moment before he nodded. Okay. What can I do to help? Jamie silently made his way down the empty streets towards Morgan's house. It hadn't been any trouble to sneak out. His dad was drunk as always, passed out in front of the TV. Nights like that, Mum went to bed early to avoid the possibility of waking him up and putting him in one of his black moods. It was too easy to walk out the front door with only the slightest creak of hinges to betray his exit. Lester hadn't wanted him to go, of course. The kid was terrified. But then, when he realized he wasn't going to convince Jamie to stay back, he tried to insist on coming himself. Well, that wasn't going to happen. Morgan had already lost Claire screwing around with this house, and whether he was about to encounter demon women or just some deranged pedophile, there was no way Jamie would allow the squirt to tag along. Not this time. Morgan had laid out the bones of the plan earlier that day. The journal never referenced a thing called Lady Wicker by name, but there were plenty of passages talking about her and she. Morgan had also found a detailed drawing that resembled the symbols on the walls of what had been Lady Wicker's prison. Some of the symbols were marred, Jamie, she said, opening the book to the page in question. Strange letters that looked nothing so much as random scratches and scribbles covered the paper. I'm sure that's what let her get out of here. It can't be that she's completely free, though, or she wouldn't still be hanging around the wake. My guess is that whatever did it just caused the cage door to open wide enough so she could stick her head out and snap at anything that gets too close. If we can fix the symbols, it'll close the door again. Well, it seemed like a good plan, as far as Jamie could tell, except he would have preferred they go during the daylight. You think I don't want that too? Morgan looked at him incredulously. Christ, Jamie, going back into that fucking house is the absolute last thing I want to do, especially at night. There's no way my parents will let me go over there after everything that's happened. They keep a close enough eye on me during the day that there's no way I'll be able to sneak out. No, we have to go at night. And so he reluctantly agreed. Jamie arrived at Morgan's house and crouched down on her porch. The fog was already starting to heavily roll in, but he could still make out the ominous outline of the Wicker house farther down the street. A slight noise made him turn as Morgan slipped out from the front door to join him. Good. You're here. I didn't want to have to wait for you out here alone. No telling if my sister will decide to show up, and I don't really want to find out what happens if she does. Now, did you bring the paint and the brushes? Jamie patted the backpack slung over his shoulder. Yeah, you have the journal? Morgan held it up along with a battery-powered flashlight to help us see so we can draw the symbols. Let's go. I want to get this over with. In silence, the pair stepped into the fog. The heavy iron gate screamed loudly as Morgan pushed it open far enough for them to squeeze through. Looking up, Jamie realized this was the closest he'd ever been to the wicker house. The structure squatted like an insect, the gaze of its paneless windows radiating malevolence as tendrils of fog curled and wrapped around its eaves. Its empty gaze seemed to follow them as they made their way up the overgrown path and slipped through the front door. Once inside, Morgan switched on the flashlight, the white beam slicing through the otherwise pitch-black darkness. She played the light around a bit to orient herself in the gloom, and Jamie could see what she'd said about the house was true. The place looked as if it hadn't been touched in the 40 years it had stood empty. Finding the staircase with the lights, Morgan slowly moved up to the second floor, Jamie following closely on her heels, carefully avoiding the rotten steps. The top of the stairwell opened to a long hallway. The door at the far end cracked slightly open. Morgan fixed her light on the opening. "That's the one," she whispered in Jamie's ear. "Come on." He shivered, but didn't know if it was from the fear or from her closeness, the tingle of her breath on his skin. Silently, they crept down the hall and soon found themselves in the room. Morgan passed the beam along the walls and Jamie's mouth dropped open. The symbols were something to be seen in the journal, certainly, but they were a completely different matter in real life. The number of them was astounding, and it was obvious that they'd been painted on the walls with meaning and purpose, far from the jumble of scribbles he'd thought when they first saw them in the book. It seemed as if they glowed with a faint luminescence, and not for the first time Jamie wondered if conducting the repairs would be as easy as Morgan had made it out to be. Finally, Morgan rested the light on the far wall, and Jamie could see exactly what she'd meant. Several of the symbols were noticeably smudged, though it was impossible to tell what might have caused the damage. Jamie dropped his pack to the floor and hurriedly removed the 2 brushes and a small can of paint he'd stuffed inside. "Here, hold this so I can see." Morgan handed in the flashlight as she opened the journal to the page she'd marked. Picking up the paint and a brush, she moved over to the damaged section. "Okay, shine it over here." He complied, and with a look of intense concentration, Morgan began to carefully paint. She'd been at the work for several minutes and was making good headway when the fog began noticeably seeping through the broken window. The feeling that he was being watched began to grow stronger, and Jamie felt a rash of goosebumps break out down his arms. He glanced from side to side, attempting to find the cause of the feeling. "Morgan, I know," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel it too. She's coming. Just keep the beam steady. Finishing this is our only chance." She continued to work. Jamie saw her brush shake slightly, small droplets of paint falling to the floor. A sudden cloud of fog boiled in through the window, and as he turned, he found himself facing the opposite corner of the room. From its depths appeared a pair of shockingly intense eyes, and they fixed on him. The gaze immediately locked his own, and in a moment Jamie felt his will drain away. The flashlight fell heavily to the floor at his feet. Jamie was floating in greyness, his mind as blank as the faceless fog surrounding him. He couldn't remember where he was or what he'd been doing, but some part of him thought it might have been important. "Jamie!" At the edge of his consciousness, he could barely make out a voice calling his name. What could they possibly want? His mind, content to remain in limbo, rejected the summons. "Jamie!" This time his name was accompanied by a sharp pain, jolting him out of the hazy dreams he'd been wallowing in. In an instant, he was back to himself. Lester stood in front of him, tears streaming from his eyes, a line of snot running down his nose as he sobbed, his hand held back for another slap. Jamie caught the boy's hand as it flew forward. "Whoa, easy, bud. I'm here. His gaze fell on Morgan. The flashlight had fallen so that the beam bled over where she was lying on the ground, twitching violently, her eyes rolled back in her head so only the whites were visible. He grabbed the light and rushed to her side, trying to hold her head steady. Morgan, come on, wake up." "Jamie?" Lester was tugging at his shoulder. "Damn it, Lester, what?" His eyes moved up and his voice failed him. The fog continued to fill the room, but even through the thick screen of white he could see the ring of children around them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their expressions blank, their eyes black. Twisting with Lester clutching his arm, he shone the beam about the room to see that they were completely surrounded. When the light reached the front of the room, it fell upon a figure lost in the fog, save for the same intense pair of eyes that almost completely bewitched him before. As the boys watched, the lines of the figure seemed to coalesce and solidify, until finally a woman appeared before them, as if by magic. Dressed all in white, she was beautiful. Her hair a black, even darker than Morgan's, her skin as pale as new fallen snow. Her lips were blood red and drawn up in a cruel, knowing smile. Her eyes were the same as before, twin stars that had seemed to draw Jamie into them with a supernatural attraction, their message one of unspeakable pleasure and pain. Jamie shuddered. At his side, Lester was crying, the words falling out of him. "Jamie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but I had to come. I just had to. And then you wouldn't wake up, and the kids were standing around us, and... Lester, shut up," Jamie snapped. "Remember what I said earlier? If you tag along, you have to keep your mouth shut." The boy quieted as Jamie slowly eased his left arm, holding the flashlight under Morgan's back. The girl had stopped convulsing, but her eyes were closed and her breath was quick and shallow. "Now!" Jamie reached for his pack and slipped his other hand inside. "When I tell you to run, I want you to run downstairs, out the door, and back home as fast as you can. Got it?" He gripped the small bottle concealed inside the pack. "Ready? Run!" In one motion, Jamie flipped the cap of the bottle and whipped his hand out of the pack in a semicircle, spraying liquid all around him. He'd taken the bottle of holy water from his mother's nightstand, but since his comic book said it sometimes worked for ghosts, had added a couple of tablespoons of salt to the mix. Whether it was the saline or the blessed water, something made the woman and her hideous charges draw back, hissing, arms raised protectively. Jerking to his feet, Jamie awkwardly picked Morgan up in his arms and stumbled through the door, running down the hallway as fast as he could, Lester dogging his heels. He just reached the bottom of the stairs, the entryway beckoning open wide before them, when he heard a crash and a scream. Turning back, he shone the flashlight on his brother. In his hurry, Lester had stepped on one of the rotten stairs, his foot punching straight through the worm-eaten wood. Worse, Jamie could see where a jagged, broken piece of stair had punctured his thigh, the blood leaking out bright red in the beam of the light. With a cry, Jamie lay Morgan at the bottom of the steps and rushed to help his brother. The leg was wedged tight, and anything he did to try to manipulate it caused Lester to moan in agony. Crying, Jamie started striking at the edges of the stair, trying to work Lester's leg free while the boy whimpered and sobbed. An unnatural silence caused Jamie to stop his struggle and raise his eyes to the top of the staircase. The woman stood there, surrounded by her children, the fog twisting around her feet, giving her the impression of floating. The message in her eyes was a promise of pain, retribution for the injury caused by the water. From where he was trapped, Lester could see everything. "Go," he cried, struggling to talk through the pain. "Get her out of here." "Lester, I can't leave you." The little boy smiled weakly. "I came to help make sure you got out, Jamie. You have to get out." "Damn it." Tears were running down Jamie's face now. "I'm coming back, you hear me? I'm getting her out, then I'm coming back." He stumbled back down to Morgan. "We're all getting out." Gripping her under her arms, Jamie started dragging her backwards out the front door. As he passed through the entryway, he glanced up and saw the woman had begun to descend the stairs towards his brother, flanked by her hideous children. Jamie redoubled his efforts, practically falling down the steps through the billowing fog. In only a few moments he was through the gate, intending to leave her there, when Morgan's eyes snapped open and she pulled herself from his grasp with a shout. "Jesus, Jamie, we have to get out of here. I was wrong, so wrong. God, she was in my mind. She wants to use me." She clutched Jamie's sleeve. "We need to get as far away from here as we can." Jamie shook his head. "I can't leave. Lester's in there. He's the only reason we got this far. I have to go back for him." Tears began to roll down Morgan's cheeks. "Jamie, you don't understand. I can't go back in there. If she uses me the way she wants, it'll mean terrible, terrible things. For all of us. For the world." Jamie smiled sadly. "I know, and I'm not asking you to, but he's my brother." He stooped down and kissed her lightly on the forehead. "I love you, Morgan. I just wanted to make sure you knew that." No, Jamie, please, don't go, please." He stood, and Morgan tried to clutch his arm, but he gently pulled away. "I'm sorry," he said. "Goodbye." And with that he turned and walked away, his shape gradually dimming in the white cloud until he was gone. Morgan collapsed on the sidewalk, her sobs the only sound breaking the silence. The wicker house watched, content in her misery, until it too was swallowed by the fog. Frank Lawrence was drunk, as he often was, more so now than he'd ever been before. Since he'd been fired from the factory, he only had time, and as far as he was concerned, there was no better way to spend time than to drink, especially lately. He took a swig from the 40 wrapped in a brown paper bag held in his hand. Mary was gone. She left shortly after Jamie and Lester had disappeared, he supposed, been taken. She'd accused him of all sorts of things, even suggesting he had a hand in their disappearance. Frank took it all, privately resenting the injustice, but knowing on some level that he deserved all that and more. Maybe he wasn't guilty of everything she tried to stick on him, but God knew he had plenty of sins. He'd never said any differently. Still, he knew he hadn't had anything to do with the boys going missing. Christ, didn't she know he loved them? It was the drink that made him lash out, and the stress he was under to provide for a family that made him drink. Hadn't he cut back after that time he'd hurt Jamie? It was too much to ask to give it up completely. No pleasing her. And hadn't he treated her well? Kept a roof over their heads, food on the table? Sure, he may have taken a swing at her every now and then, but lots of husbands did. Nobody's perfect. And he never hit the boys, well, not after that time. He wandered down Blackwood Drive and found himself standing in front of the broken-down house near where they'd found the Fontaine girl. She'd been out of her mind, shaking and screaming and crying. When they finally got her to calm down, she'd been talking crazy. Women in white, ghost children, absolute lunacy. And somehow his boys were mixed up in the middle of it. They'd searched the house looking for them and found Jamie's backpack in one of the rooms upstairs. Morgan insisted there'd been some old journal she'd had with her. There was no sign of that. Probably just another figment of her imagination. The symbols in the room were sure odd, but for the life of him, Frank couldn't figure out what made the girl try to cover them up. It was obvious there was a decent-sized portion of the wall that had been recently painted over, the paint and brushes still wet where they lay. Oof, the place gave him the creeps. He took another slug of booze. Fucking place. Should probably be burnt to the ground. His boys missing, the girl's sister missing. And now he'd heard the Fontaines had packed the girl off to some loony bin somewhere. Couldn't get her to tell a straight story. Out of her goddamn mind. Hell, for all Frank knew, she'd had something to do with Jamie and Lester disappearing. No probably about it. Someone should definitely burn this place. Before he'd had even time to really think about the thought, Frank was halfway up the path to the front door. He had a lighter in his pocket. Well, a house this old with that much dry wood, that was plenty to make it go like a matchbook. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, fumbling for his lighter, not noticing the viscous fog that had begun creeping about him. By the time he looked up, lighter in hand, the world was completely white. If he hadn't known it, he wouldn't have been able to tell the house stood in front of him. He took a step forward and banged his shin, falling on the steps. He struggled to get up, but his balance was off, a victim of the booze. Finally, he regained his feet when he heard the voice. "Hello, Father." Frank drunkenly swayed where he stood. Was he imagining things? But no, there was Jamie in front of him, paler than usual, and his eyes strangely black, but there was no mistaking his boy. "Jamie, is it really you?" He felt tears brimming in his eyes. "Oh, I've missed you, boy. You and your brother." His pale son smiled slightly. "I'm sure you have. But don't worry, we're here now. And our mother is with us." Jamie moved forward, and to Frank's surprise, he saw Lester step beside him. Was that the other Fontaine girl next to them? Well, it had to be. Frank dropped to his knees. "Missed you, boys. Missed you so much." He opened his arms, and they moved into his embrace, their arms tightly encircling his neck. "Missed you." The words trailed off as Frank saw a beautiful woman appear in the fog, her otherworldly eyes alight with joy and hunger. The cloud continued to thicken until all that was visible were a few shadows that seemed to struggle briefly before falling still. There was no sound, as sighs and screams alike were drowned, lost in the fog. Covered in a blanket of white, Arthur's wake continued to die. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Every so often a story just comes out of left field and it completely surprises me, shocks me, and makes me think, I just have to read this for all of you. This one is weird, wonderful, and it's going to surprise you. Wherever you think this goes from the start is definitely not where it ends up, and that's pretty much all I can tell you without ruining the surprise. You're going to love this one. It's incredibly well written. It's a roller coaster ride, and let me not say anything else. Let's just get on with it. So, here we go tonight, my dear friends, with The Butcher on Barker Street by Impossible Bit 995. Part 1. The call came in a little after 3 in the morning. When I reached over to the nightstand, I accidentally knocked over my alarm clock. It crashed to the ground, shattering into jagged shards of plastic and glass. Not a good way to start the day. I answered the phone. Look, whoever this is, you owe me a new alarm clock. Get over here. I recognized Troy's voice immediately. We have a problem. Please would be appreciated. Stow the snark, James, he said. This is serious. I looked around my empty bedroom. There were piles of clothes strewn about the floor, along with old gin bottles and spent cigarette butts. Last night was a haze of loud music and endless drinking. Well, I couldn't be sure, but my breath said I'd ordered a pizza too. Looking down at the bits of plastic and glass, I said, Fine, but while I got you on the line, let me tell you a little bit about this new alarm clock you're going to buy me. While I got dressed, I went on and on about the clock. Yeah, I wanted one that could connect to the internet, play music and use Bluetooth. Troy was quiet as I rambled. When I was finished, he said, I'm at Brownstone on 32nd, apartment 25. Move your ass, we're burning daylight. Outside the bedroom window, the sky was dark and amassed with clouds. There wasn't daylight yet to burn. The call disconnected and I pocketed my cell phone. I swiped my jacket from the floor, There was a slight bulge in the breast pocket. My cigarettes are still there then. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and handgun from the dresser. On the way out, I stopped in the bathroom to brush my teeth, but even after relentlessly scrubbing with cheap cinnamon-flavored toothpaste, my breath still smelled like greasy pizza and gin. Well, some things never come out no matter what you do. Driving to the south side of town, I found the brownstone Troy had told me about and stepped inside. The inner walls were white and barren, save for a few odd holes and yellow cigarette stains. The carpet was fuzzy and mottled by discolored blotches. I'm not one to judge. My place wasn't much better. The rent was a little more expensive because I lived on the east side, but otherwise they were pretty much the same. In the city, in life, you've got to do whatever it takes to get by, even if it means living in a rat-infested apartment where neighbors blared screamo music and there was asbestos in the walls. Climbing 2 flights of stairs, I knocked twice on the door to the apartment number 25. Footsteps thundered from inside, followed by the rattle of a chain lock being disarmed. The door opened, and Troy peered out at me through a crack in the door. This better be good, I said, rubbing the exhaustion from my eyes. I was having a great dream. Yeah, look, you can tell me about it later, he said, throwing the door open and pulling me inside. He slammed the door shut behind us, locking it again. A word of warning. Situation's a little tricky. In our line of work, when wasn't it tricky? Well, Troy had your typical bouncer look. Broad-shouldered, short blonde hair, lantern jaw, built like a linebacker. He wore dark denim pants and a grimy leather jacket with more years on it than most cars. He was the kind of guy Mr. Rousseau liked to keep for the first half of the day because he was well-read and personable. Intimidating at first glance, but in private company he was quiet and reserved. These were the hours Mr. Rousseau handled the legitimate side of the business. Last mornings and early afternoons were the only hours that worked for Troy's schedule since he had a wife and 2 kids. Wait a minute. Troy leaned in close and sniffed. Are you drunk? Not entirely. What the fuck, James? It's a Thursday. Yeah, and Mr. Rousseau usually has me on at night, so why the hell am I being called in at 3 in the morning? He gestured for me to follow as he started down the hallway. I didn't recognize the apartment. Mr. Rousseau lived on the north side of town, and Troy had a house on the west side. The south side of the city was reserved for addicts, deadbeats, and broke college kids. There weren't many in Rousseau's personal circle that fit that bill. We turned at the corner and followed the rest of the hallway to a closed door. Troy hesitated with his hand on the knob, looking over his shoulder at me. There were shadows in his eyes, despair. He sighed and turned the knob, pushing the door open. Instantly, before I'd even entered the bedroom, I could taste the metal and copper in the air, smell the early stages of decay. If something like that doesn't wake you up, nothing will. The bedroom was a dingy space with splintered floorboards and a sagged ceiling. The next bad rainstorm would probably knock out a few tiles. The furniture was ancient and dilapidated. In the far corner, an old boxy TV displayed a screen of black and white fuzz, hissing quietly in the background as we examined the scene. What the fuck happened? I asked. Any semblance of drunkenness had abandoned me, replaced by a stone-cold sobriety that made me want to scream or punch something. There was an incident, Troy said haphazardly. Always the professional. It's a bit complicated. That was one way of putting it. On the queen-size bed was a partially naked girl lying limp on the mattress. Sheets and blankets swirled around her, spattered in blood. Her limbs were splayed at odd angles, lifeless. The back of her head was caved open with a jagged rim of exposed skull peering out through her long black hair. I kneeled to inspect the wound, thinking Troy had maybe brought me in for amateur medical attention. I spent the first 18 years of my life working on a farm, caring and tending to animals. Whenever I wasn't slaughtering them, that is. Adjusting the head of a nearby lamp on the nightstand, a bright yellow light shone against the top of the girl's head. Her injury was untreatable in given circumstances. Blunt force trauma with noticeable swelling and severe hemorrhaging. Skin was ruddy red with a slight undertone of blue. There were tiny bits of bone, hair and flesh amongst the exposed grey matter of her brain. I almost suggested a hospital in the area, but reality dawned on me. I would have been better off suggesting a morgue. Then, as I was examining the wound, the girl's brain began to shift beneath the undulating pool of blood. For a moment, I thought she might open her eyes and sit up in bed. This expectation died in its cradle as I watched a fly crawl out from the mixture of blood and membrane. His wings fluttered a few times, and once they were clean, it took off into the air. I quickly turned away, gagging against last night's dinner. Shouldn't have had so much pizza or gin, but, well, I'm a creature of habit. Seriously? I stammered, leaning against the wall, staring down at my shoes, desperately trying not to think about the dead girl. What the fuck happened? I already told you. There was an incident. No shit, there was an incident. Look, it was an accident, James. You don't get an injury like that from an accident unless it involves a head-on collision or a flight of stairs. An accident. Well, that makes it so much better. I glimpsed at the girl again, my heart swelling with a mixture of disgust and pity. Is she, dead? I don't know why I asked. She had the pale complexion of a corpse, the putrid stink of a corpse, probably had the sour taste of one too. Troy shrugged. Oh, my gut tells me she's most likely dead. Most likely? No, yeah, she's dead. He considered this for a moment before nodding. Definitely dead. Mr. Russo clubbed her over the head with an ashtray. I exhaled carefully. That ought to do it. I reached inside my jacket pocket and removed a pack of Viceroy cigarettes, lighting one the instant it met my lips. Why'd he do it? I lost his cool for a second. Really? Only for a second? Troy threw his hands up defensively. Look, I was just chilling in the living room, reading a book when I heard her scream. By the time I got in here, well, it was finished. Did he say anything? Wants us to clean it up. No shit, Sherlock. I mean, did he say anything about why he did it? Troy scoffed. Oh, yeah, he actually wrote a 10-page essay about it if you're interested in reading it. I considered punching him, but the only reason Troy and I had lasted as partners was because we knew not to take it out on each other. We had an unspoken policy. Just do the job and get out. No questions asked. In situations like that, though, it was hard to refrain from asking any questions. Well, I said, slowly regaining my equilibrium with the help of nicotine calming my nerves. Where the hell is Russo? Don't worry about it. I called some guys to take him back to his penthouse. We gotta fix this fast. The girl has a roommate. She's out of town right now, but she'll be back around noon. Oh, we are so fucked. Not if we move fast, Troy promised. I've already got it figured out. I'll stay here and clean up the mess. I just need you to take care of the body. Fuck you. I'm not driving a dead body through the city at 3 a.m. I'll stay and clean up the scene. You can deliver the girl. I can't. Why not? I, don't have a license. It hasn't stopped you before. Oh, my tags are expired too. That's when it hit me. Fucking forget about it. We're not putting a dead girl in the trunk of my car. Why not? Because it's my personal vehicle, dumbass. It's a minivan, not a Maserati. It's still my car. I'm not letting you fuck it up. It's what soccer moms use to drive their kids to school. Little blood isn't going to ruin it. I started pacing back and forth across the room, and the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The nicotine was making me sick, and my sleep deprivation wasn't helping either. Troy groaned, exasperated. Will you please just be cool about this? We don't have to bicker like an old married couple. We need to get this fixed now. Son of a bitch. I kicked the wall. Dried paint chips fell to the floor. Okay, all right, fine. What's the play? I got some plastic wrap and a few blankets. We'll bundle her up, carry her downstairs, and load her into the trunk. Then you'll take her to one of the usual spots. By usual spots, he meant one of the local businesses we use to dispose of bodies. There were a few throughout the city, but my go-to was Mason & Sons, a funeral home on the north side of town. Mason was a pleasant man, despite his affiliation with someone like Mr. Rousseau. And his means of disposal was perhaps the most humane I could think of, better than the scrapyard or the butcher shop. Oh, we exited the apartment, went downstairs and stepped out into the parking lot. Troy's car was near the back corner, far away from the rest. He opened the trunk and removed the top panel. Beneath, where there should have been a spare tire, was instead a cache of random supplies for situations like this. Handcuffs, duct tape, zip ties, trash bags, bleach soap, ammonia, disinfectant wipes, paper towels, and whatever else. I almost made a joke about how maybe he should be driving the minivan, but I couldn't get the thoughts from my mind to my tongue without wanting to puke. So I just silently smoked my cigarette instead. Back in the apartment, we gathered everything covered in blood into one of the trash bags. We also threw in some of the girl's personal belongings like her wallet, keys, and cell phone. Troy took whatever excess cash from her purse, asking me if I wanted to split it. "You fucking scumbag," I muttered. "Oh, forgive me, Prince Charming," he said. "Some of us got bills to pay." More like alimony. Troy cuffed me on the shoulder for that one. In this line of work, it was hard to have a family, especially on nights when you had to gaze into the emaciated face of a young dead girl, trying not to think of your own daughter or wife. You have to lie to yourself. Detach yourself from the situation. Pretend that you can still be the good guy, but ultimately, guilt always resurfaces. Usually late at night, while you're in bed, listening to the silence of the world around you, staring up at the shadows on the ceiling like ink blots on a Rorschach test. "I see a happy little dog," you might say. "I see a pretty pink pony. I see the shattered skull of a young woman. I see the maggots wriggling around inside her brain. I see myself protecting the man who killed her because I'm just a dog on a leash." Yep, guys like us develop hobbies to distract ourselves from the silence, from the memories. Troy was a frequent reader of everything and anything. I'd seen him consume more books than a librarian. Once I even caught him reading the dictionary because he didn't have any other novels on hand. And for me, I liked to drink and smoke. Help me sleep. Help me clear my mind. When I wasn't drinking, I was working. And my occupation was a complicated matter, if that weren't already apparent. I usually followed Mr. Rousseau around like a good old little pup, going all across the city to visit underground clubs, bars, and other late-night establishments with morally questionable exchanges. If I wasn't acting as Mr. Rousseau's bodyguard or personal assistant, I was off collecting debts and payments, or that or I was delivering packages. Most of the time I had no clue what these packages contained, but I had my assumptions: narcotics, money, evidence, and so on. Once I had to deliver a sphere-shaped package wrapped in duct tape and plastic. I kept telling myself it was a basketball or soccer ball, but my gut told me otherwise. That was the first time I'd met the butcher. When I handed in the package, he licked his lips and said, "This'll do just fine." I avoided the butcher when at all possible. Part 2. By the time Troy and I finished collecting personal belongings, we had 2 bags full. I delivered those to the trunk of my car, and when I returned, Troy had already got the girl enveloped in cellophane. We were somewhat skilled in the trade of making a person disappear. We wrapped the girl in a few blankets and quilts. One of them was pink and had the word Barbie scrawled across it in swooping letters. "So," I said, "your daughter fell out of her doll phase then?" That's what happens when you get them a cell phone." The last time we did this, we used blankets designed with monster trucks and SpongeBob. His son had just turned 11 and got an Xbox with games like Call of Duty and Halo. Once the blankets were in place, we secured them with duct tape. Then, after checking the apartment hallways, we carried the body to the parking lot. The sun was just starting to peer over the horizon, but morning traffic still hadn't hit yet. With the body inside, Troy shut the trunk and sighed. "Hey, you gonna take her to the butcher?" "No," I said, a little too quickly to be impartial on the matter. Mason's place. Butcher's closer. She's going to Mason. End of story. He shrugged and checked his watch. I'll better get moving before he gets busy then. No shit, I said, climbing into the car and starting the engine. Have fun, Mr. Clean. Grumbling, he waved me away and headed back towards the building. Hey, I'm serious about that alarm clock, I called out after him. It better be expensive and brand new. Troy flipped me off over his shoulder and disappeared inside. I shifted into drive and started across the city, careful to obey the speed limit and stop at all traffic lights. Yeah, the last thing I needed was to catch any unwanted attention. While I was driving, my hands began to shake. The road oscillated in front of me, fusing with the night sky. Stars blurred and coalesced into a single bright light of fluorescent white. I rubbed my eyes and searched the glove box, returning with a hand-sized bottle of gin. It steadied my nerves, placating the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Well, a man without his medicine goes a little mad from time to time. At Mason and Son's funeral home, I parked in the back. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail, so I climbed the back steps to the rear entrance and knocked. It took a few minutes, but eventually his wife appeared. Her smile vanished, and she looked at me with discernible disgust. It's 4:30 in the morning, she growled. Nice to see you too, Sheila, I replied, affecting a delicate tone. She, like many others, preferred Troy over me, but she could have probably gone the rest of her life without ever speaking to either one of us again. Yeah, Mason here? She stepped aside, waving me inside. He's in the back office. Be quick about it. We've got a family coming in at 5. You could try to be a little nicer. Mr. Rousseau pays you to keep the fucking lights on in this place, you know. Her scowl deepened, forming lines across her forehead, accentuating the hollow crevices around her sunken eyes. She reeled back and slapped me across the face. Make it snappy, you rat fucking. Get the hell out of here. Fair enough. I rubbed the sting from my cheek and moved down the hallway. That's when I bumped into 2 of Mason's sons. I didn't remember their names, and they probably didn't remember mine either, but we were familiar with each other. A while back, Mr. Rousseau made me retrieve the older one from a crack den on the south side while the kid was on a bender. I had to fend off 2 different dealers and a chihuahua that wouldn't stop nipping at my heels. Because of the younger son, I'd had to visit a few families on the north side with a large cash settlement to keep them silent about something involving their teenage daughters. Oh, I don't know all the details, but the little bastard wasn't allowed to interact with any of the grieving customers who came in. Probably for the best, all things considered. The sons nodded at me and left. I continued down the hall into the back office. Inside, Mason was sat at his desk with a cup of coffee in one hand and a manila file in the other. He flipped through pages, squinting through a pair of tiny spectacles that were comically small. I had to wonder if he could even see through them. Despite his kids, Mason was a decent person. Well, as far as humans are concerned. He reminded me of my grandfather. An old oak tree slowly wilting while the rest of the forest was chopped down to make room for new shops and apartments. Just a man trying to stay afloat, willing to do whatever it took to keep his family safe and secure. Mason glanced up at me and smiled. James, wasn't expecting you. Sorry, Mason, I said. Tried to call, but there was no answer. Phone's in the other room. He set his coffee down and closed the folder. Leaning forward on his desk, he clasped his hands together and asked, What can I do for you, my boy? He was from a different generation where people said things like, my boy, or simmer down, or, on occasion, such as when I brought his son home from the drug den, damn shame, while shaking his head. I sat in the chair across from him and explained the situation, well, what little I knew. When I was finished, Mason took off his spectacles, pinched the bridge of his nose, and exhaled. He tried to smooth back the wispy grey hair on his head, but there were so few left that they refused to obey. The situation's a bit muddled, I told him, affecting Troy's professionalism. We're trying to get it cleaned up as soon as possible, so if you have anything, I'd appreciate it. And I'm sure Mr. Rousseau would appreciate it too. Whenever dealing with these people, you have to throw out Mr. Rousseau's name as much as possible. The only way to get them to treat you seriously. The only way to keep their attention. Otherwise, you're just a rat fuck, a dog without an owner. Let me see, Mason said, flipping through a large black ledger. With every page, he licked his pruny fingers and hummed. Damn shame. Damn shame. Young girl, was it? Yes, sir. Not as young as you might think, but younger than either of us. Late teens, early 20s, maybe. I'm guessing a college student. Maybe a part-time escort. Rousseau met most of his paramours late at night while wandering the city's underbelly. Dancers at the clubs and waitresses at the bars. A repetitive routine that usually worked in his favor. And how did it happen? Mason asked. I hesitated. My tongue wouldn't form the words. Probably for the best you don't know, sir. He chuckled. It was easy to approach these situations with a little bit of humor when you weren't looking at the corpse. Even someone like Mason, who'd been embalming and burying bodies since before I could drive, would probably feel faint at the sight of that girl. He'd clutch his metaphorical pearls and blink back tears. Maybe spend the afternoon in his office, drinking from the bottle of bourbon he kept in the bottom drawer. How soon would you need a hole? Mason asked without looking up from his agenda. Today, if possible. The way Mason and Sons worked was we would deliver a body a few hours before a funeral. They'd dig the grave about 4 or 5 feet deeper than usual, and we'd drop the dead body inside. Then we'd cover them up with a few inches of dirt, just enough to conceal the corpse. Once the funeral was done, they'd transport the coffin and drop it down on top of the other corpse before sealing up the grave. When the body was taken care of, they burned all the evidence and possessions in their industrial furnace. At least, that's what they told me. But the last time I visited, his younger son was sporting a new wristwatch that seemed vaguely familiar. I'm sorry to tell you, Mason said, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms across his chest. But we just don't have any open graves right now. If you can hold on to the body for a few more days, we might have availability this weekend. We've got nowhere to store it until then. He cocked an eyebrow. Where is she now? My trunk. Mason blanched and reached for his coffee, his hand trembling as he lifted the mug to his lips. Sweet baby Jesus. You got her with you as we speak? That's what you're telling me? Yes, sir, unfortunately. Like I said, it's a bit of a snafu. No kidding, my boy. He rubbed a few strands of hair on his chin. I'm sorry, I wish I could help, but my hands are tied. I feigned nonchalance, but in reality, my heart was pounding against my chest. Sweat beaded on the back of my neck. I kept thinking about that dead girl, the hole in her skull, the stew of bone shards and hair inside her head. I needed to get rid of her, to get her out of my trunk so I could go back home, drink myself stupid and fall asleep. Forget the day, let another replace it. Hey, you all right? Mason asked me. Can I get you a cup of coffee or tea? No, but thank you, sir. I had Jen waiting for me back in the car. I should, probably get going. You know, I'm surprised to see you again. Thought you would have taken your leave by now. That was a plan, wasn't it? Yes, sir, but things changed. Thought I'd have paid my debts by now, but the bills never stop coming. He laughed. You can say that again. Last winter, my father took a spill down the stairs and hit his head. While my mother was doing her best to sell the farm, there were no buyers. It was taking every last penny to keep her afloat while she waited for the life insurance policy to kick in. Bureaucrats always found a way to slow down the process. I stood from my chair, shook Mason's hand, and left. His wife followed me out of the door, giving me one last glare before slamming the door shut. When I got back into the car, I was overcome by the putrid stink of decay. I could practically taste the withering flesh, taste the metallic tinge of her blood in my mouth despite the layers of plastic and blankets. There must have been a hole or something, part that wasn't covered. I rolled down the window and turned on the AC. Then I retrieved my phone from my pocket and dialed Troy's number. 3 rings before he answered. Yeah, everything taken care of. Not quite. Great. What now? Mason doesn't have any open graves at the moment. I guess you'll have to go to the butcher, Troy said. My blood turned cold and I squeezed the steering wheel, digging my nails into the leather. No way. I'm not going to the butcher. Quit being such a baby and just do it. The guy's a freaking freak show. I'm not going there alone. Well, I'm a little preoccupied at the moment. Troy took a deep breath and sighed. You could try Davis's scrapyard. I don't have his number, so you'll have to drive over. He should be in by now. God, I wanted to smash my phone against the dashboard. Mr. Rousseau paid well, but in some situations it wasn't enough. Rock and a hard place, I guess. Whatever, I said, exasperated. Just hurry up with the apartment. It'd go a lot faster if you didn't call. I hung up and tossed the phone into the passenger seat. My foot pressed against the accelerator, turning the faint glow of streetlights into a hazy smear of orange and yellow. Rain pattered against the windshield, and the rubber wipers squeaked against the glass. My hands fidgeted about the wheel, trembling whenever they didn't have something stable to grasp onto. I reached into my pocket for another cigarette. By the time I'd arrived at the scrapyard, I was stifling a gag between clenched teeth. The car reeked of burning tobacco and death. You could soak the inside with bleach, but the smell still wouldn't go away. Parking at the front gate, I found Davis in the main trailer, drinking a beer and throwing files into a trash can. He glanced over his shoulder at me, brow already furrowed, eyes bloodshot with fatigue. Nah, he said, no hesitation, no fear. Sorry, James, but I can't. You don't even know why I'm here. Don't need to, buddy. If you're here, it's probably something bad. He emptied an entire drawer of files into the trash can before tossing it aside. Trust me, this is the last place you want to be. Why's that? Last week, cops busted one of my garages. They've been watching my every move ever since. Whatever you're here for, I doubt you want to get me involved. Davis operated several chop shops across the city. On the surface, they were like any other garage, but in the back, they were stripping stolen cars for spare parts. Not exactly the worst of Mr. Rousseau's colleagues, but his operation was big and turned quite a profit. An influential man to have in your pocket. His scrapyard was convenient when it came to dead bodies. They had the kind of machinery that could crush a vehicle into a tiny cube. Imagine what it did to a corpse. Plus, there was plenty of land to bury bodies and plenty of rubbish to hide the stink of rotting humans. It's just one girl, I said. A slip of a thing. Wouldn't be hard for you to dispose of. Wouldn't take any time. He scoffed. Maybe I'm not speaking clearly, but the cops are investigating me. They're looking into every single thing I do. Dead girl is just what they need to get a warrant. Shit, screw the warrant. That'd be enough for probable cause. We both be in cuffs, buddy. Is that what you want? Sometimes prison seemed an easier sentence than working for Mr. Rousseau. But at the same time, it wouldn't change much. I'd still be a mud on a leash. I'd just have a different owner. Story of my life. Davis and I went back and forth, arguing about the logistics of the situation, but in the end I retreated to my car and started the engine again. I always called Troy, but I already knew what he'd tell me. He'd been with me since I first left the brownstone. I had to go and see the butcher on Barker Street. Part 3. There were several reasons why I hated the butcher shop. The owner was a whack job, and I mean that as nicely as possible. The shop itself was, well, let's just say the meat wasn't exactly kosher. And worst of all, it reminded me of my childhood, of days on the farm with my father, staring into the beady eyes of animals that would become burgers or steaks or sausages. When I turned 13, I no longer helped tend the fields. That was a job for my uncles. No, instead, I was in the slaughterhouse with my dad, cutting throats and hanging carcasses from hooks, skinning hides and carving meat from the bone. It was always cold and dark, No matter how much I showered or scrubbed myself clean, there was always blood, either underneath my fingernails or in the creases of my skin, or, on occasion, in my hair. The day I turned 18, I moved out. Didn't even bother packing, I just took whatever I could carry and left. No letter, no goodbye, nothing. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if not for my father, but you don't get to choose your family, and sometimes you don't get to choose your vocation. It chooses you. Rather, it's a result of your circumstances. You're almost always doing something you hate for someone you despise. Just when you think you're about to escape, fate pulls you back in. Life is a cycle, blood in a sink circling the drain. As I drove away from the scrapyard, rain falling all around me, I noticed a pair of headlights reflected in the rearview mirror. Working for someone like Mr. Russo makes you paranoid, makes you jump to conclusions, and so I started taking random turns down roads I'd never visited. For a moment, it seemed I was free of my pursuer, but then through the darkness, the headlights appeared again, shining through the rear window, filling the interior of the car with their blinding lights. They were getting brighter and brighter. The car was slowly closing in on me. Stay calm, I told myself. Just do the job and go home. There was a loud bump from the back, as if the body had shifted and smacked against the trunk. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see the girl sitting upright and looking at me through her cowl of blankets and quilts. But there was nothing other than those headlights. When I turned back round, I realized I was crossing onto the other side of the road and jerked the wheel in the opposite direction, swerving back into my lane. That's when the red and blue lights began to flash behind me. Oh, you've got to be shitting me, I thought, wishing I'd never visited Davis in the first place. I pulled onto the shoulder and parked. While the police cruiser settled a few feet behind me, I hid my bottle of gin in the center console. Desperately, I lit another cigarette and retrieved a pack of gum from the dash. By the time the officer finally climbed out of their car, my jaw was aching. Regardless, I unwrapped a few more pieces of gum and puffed on my cigarette. Watching them through my side mirror, my legs started bouncing with anxiety. There was another bump from the back. The police officer stopped halfway to my vehicle and removed their flashlights. The beam cut through the darkness, hovering over the rear of my car, aimed at the back window. Well, thankfully, my windows were tinted. Oh, come on, you prick, I thought. Just keep walking. Give me a ticket and get the hell out of here. The officer extinguished their flashlight and continued along the road. They stopped at the driver's side window and tapped against the glass with their knuckles. I rolled down the window and forced a half-hearted smile. Good morning, officer. She looked at me with a blank stare. You have any idea why I pulled you over? No, ma'am. Well, you were swerving. Really? I hesitated, as if thinking about it. Oh, I must have guessed, well, I drifted off there for a second. I won't let it happen again. She leaned in close, her face shadowed by the bill of her cap. Her eyes pierced into me, looking past my facade of normalcy, seeing the panic below, bubbling beneath the surface. Her nose twitched as she sniffed. Have you been drinking, sir? No, ma'am, not since yesterday. She sniffed again, frowning, and her expression constricted with disgust. Oh, she could smell the decay, could smell the girl in the trunk. I pulled the cigarette from my lips and exhaled, hoping to cover it up, maybe distract her too. She waved away the smoke and drew back from the window. You mind telling me where you're going at an hour like this? Just on my way, ma'am, I lied. I was running a few errands after work. Where do you work? Graveyard shift at the hospital. Maintenance and sanitation. The officer considered this carefully. There was doubt in her eyes, but she didn't press the issue any further. I'm gonna need your license and registration. Of course. I reached into the glove box and retrieved the necessary paperwork. And then from my wallet I produced my ID. She took both and retreated to her vehicle. Once she was out of sight, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Rousseau. It rang a few times and clicked. What? I'm on 15th, south side. I need a distraction immediately. Give me 2 minutes. I watched through the rear-view mirror as the officer entered my credentials into the system. Occasionally, she lifted her head and stared at the back of my car, knitting her eyebrows in confusion. Even if she didn't know, she could feel it. Could feel that something was off. Feel the pull of the dead girl in the trunk. People have a natural intuition for these things. They just don't always realize it. Before she could string the pieces together, a car came flying down the road toward us. It was moving too fast to make out the model or driver, but I'm sure it was one of Rousseau's guys. The officer turned on the emergency lights and pulled away from the curb, stopping alongside my car. I tossed my license and registration through the open window. "I'll leave you with a warning this time," she said before spinning around and going after the other driver. I leaned my head against the seat and exhaled. Then I removed the bottle of gin from the center console and took another drink. When I had my wits about me again, I started down the road for Barker Street. About 10 minutes later, I arrived at the butcher shop. Well, it was almost 5:30. The butcher shop should have been open, but the sign in the window read, "Closed. Come back later." I pulled into the alleyway and parked at the back of the building by the loading dock. Not much in life scares me, but being there at the butcher shop filled me with an inexplicable dread. I almost preferred to take the body home and put it in my bathtub until Mason or Davis could dispose of it. But that was a risk I don't think Mr. Rousseau would want me to take. So I climbed out of the driver's seat, stamped out my cigarette, and walked up to the rear entrance. I pounded my fist against the door and waited, counting every second that passed until it opened. The butcher was a bear of a man with thick black hair and an untrimmed beard. There were pale pink scars on his face and permanent wrinkles above his brow. His eyes were glacial and severe. Everyone shrunk under his scrutiny, even Mr. Rousseau on the rare instance when they were face to face. He wore an old white t-shirt splattered with old blood. A heavy leather apron was draped over his torso. He stank of meat and cleaning chemicals. I tried at a smile, but he met me with enough indifference to make the smile falter. Now, the butcher didn't play to social niceties, didn't recognize them as necessary. "What?" he growled, his voice heavy with the scratchy rasp of someone who'd been smoking their entire life. "I'm busy, boy. Make it quick." "Good to see you, too." Well, he started closing the door, and I slammed my palm against it, but the butcher was twice my size, if not larger, with double the mass and strength. The door continued to close, little by little. "I've got a body," I whispered. "I need your help." The butcher opened the door. "Can't. Too busy. Take your problems elsewhere, boy." "Yeah, see, I already did that. No one else is available. You're my last resort." "Ain't got the time." "Well, Mr. Rousseau would really appreciate it if you made time." This sparked a sense of urgency within him. He grunted and stepped outside of the shop. "Be fast about it, boy." Together we went to the trunk and unloaded the body. The butcher wasted no time at all at taking her by the head and lifting her out. I stumbled after him, trying to grab at the feet as he dragged her towards the back door. From there we carried her through the back of the shop, into the kitchen area, down a flight of steps leading to the basement. The upstairs was a very generic design, redolent of old diners with checkered floors and swinging light fixtures. Small wooden tables that could have been purchased at a flea market. The basement, though, was something from a nightmare. Barren stone walls coated in dust, cobwebs hanging in every corner, steel pipes wafting steam, narrow corridors that seemed to go on and on for an eternity. Well, truth be told, I'd only been to the butcher shop a handful of times, usually in the company of Troy. I'd never set foot in the basement, never dared to cross the threshold, to descend into the abyss below. I knew what happened down here. I knew how the sausage was made and, if possible, wanted to refrain from venturing into the belly of the beast. But the butcher wasn't a man to negotiate. nor was he someone you wanted to piss off. So I held my tongue as we traversed those cramped halls, moving further and further into the underground. "Up here and to the left," the butcher said, swinging his head towards an open door. We stepped into a white-tiled room with a large metal slab that acted as a table. There were steel sinks along the right wall, and above them were two parallel magnetic strips with various cutlery detached. Hanging from the left wall was a generic medkit beside a large mirror. The butcher heaved the girl onto the table, dropping her down as if she were no more than a piece of meat. It occurred to me that within a few hours, that's exactly what she would have been. Grabbing a blade from the magnetic strip, he cut away the duct tape, peeling back the blankets and plastic wrap. Beneath this hastily made cocoon, the girl was pale-skinned and covered in blood. A wound had continued to drip and drain during the entirety of our ride, smearing across her face and clothes until she looked like Carrie on prom night. The butcher lifted his hand to her cheek, gently caressing the skin. For the first time ever, it seemed there was sadness in those cold eyes. His hand moved closer, lower, pressing against the torso and chest, grabbing at her limbs to maneuver them. "The flesh is tender," he said clinically. "The muscles are stiff, though. Rigor mortis is setting in. No good. She'll have to wait until the tension subsides." He checked his wristwatch and grumbled. "This won't do, but I'll keep her anyway." I was disgusted with his professionalism, disgusted with myself for having any part of it. I removed a cigarette from my jacket, and the butcher cracked me on the side of the head. He waved his finger the same way my father used to when I asked if I could work in the fields again. The butcher returned to the body, examining the head wound with a pensive stare. "This is no good. The brain suffered too much trauma. The meat's ruined." "Does anyone actually eat the brain?" He nodded emphatically. "Every part of the carcass is vital. Brains, bones, and all." I wondered then about all the people who came to his shop. Imagine them grabbing a pound of brisket or a flank of steak before heading home, where they'd fire up the grill and cook their newly acquired meat. Thought about how they might sit down with their families for some good old-fashioned barbecue. How the children would pick at their teeth afterward, trying to get the small pieces of fat out while Daddy Dearest loosened his belt a few notches and the mother wrapped leftovers in plastic. It made me sick to my stomach knowing what this girl would become. For a time, she might have been special, might have been treated to expensive drinks and potent narcotics. Mr. Rousseau probably took her by the arm and paraded her through some nightclub. A girl more than half his age with silky black hair and a lithe frame. A girl with friends and family and a roommate. A girl with no idea how her story would end. Carved and shredded and served. A meal to be dissolved in stomach acids until there was nothing left. God, my guilt wore on me like a shroud, especially since it wasn't being combated by the djinn. But would I even recognize her face in a few weeks when she inevitably appeared on the news? Would I remember driving all across the city with her in the trunk, sliding around like loose change? Probably not. By then, I'd be disposing of the next body, the next nameless victim Mr. Rousseau left in his wake. "What's wrong with you?" the butcher asked, anger sharpening his tone. "Why are you crying?" I dabbed at my cheeks. My fingertips came back wet. He was right, I was crying. "Where's the other one?" the butcher remarked. "Your partner. He's better for this. He doesn't cry or make a fuss." While he might have maintained an apathetic countenance, Troy had also read so many books that he could no longer discern the difference between fact and fiction, had lost touch with reality. He was on the verge of marital separation, of losing his house and possibly kids because his wife knew there was something wrong with him. Oh, she couldn't put her finger on it, couldn't suss it out, but her instincts told her to run as far as possible, to get away from this shadow of a man that disappeared for the first half of a day working a job she knew nothing about. We weren't necessarily dangerous people, but we were involved in dangerous activities, the kind that always came at a cost. But I didn't tell the butcher any of that. He wouldn't have cared even if I did. Those things simply didn't matter to someone like him. They existed outside his realm of comprehension. This shop was his world. These tiled walls and stone floors. The knives above the sink. The slab of meat on his table waiting to be cut open and pulled apart. Those were the only things that held any importance to him. Part 4. He began to paw at the girl's clothes, but there was something I couldn't bear to see. I delivered the body and helped clean up this mess, but whatever happened next wasn't part of my job description. There are still some bags in the car, I said. Personal possessions and whatever else. The butcher set aside his knife and nodded. Go grab it, I'll dispose of it. And he waved me off. Hurry, boy, I'm very busy, no time to dawdle. I slipped out of the room and started down the hall. About halfway, I stopped and turned over my shoulder. It was only darkness and stone, and I wondered how far it went. What else was beneath the butcher shop? Maybe storage or more freezers, maybe something else. As I stood there, gazing into the dark, I thought I heard someone speak. Didn't sound like the butcher. Didn't sound like anyone, really. Just an incoherent collection of hollow whispers, a whistling current of air snaking through the cracks in the walls. Hello? I called out. The butcher appeared from the doorway. What do you want? He swung his head the other way, gazing down the opposite end of the hall. Then he turned back towards me. Hurry, boy. Go get her things and bring them back. Then you can leave. I don't have time for your shenanigans. I shook off my anxiety and climbed the steps. Outside, I grabbed the 2 garbage bags from the trunk and closed it. On my way back inside, I saw a homeless man in the alleyway staring at me. There was blood pasted around the corners of his mouth and chunks of flesh in his beard. I looked down at his hands where he cupped a half-eaten rodent, a long-tailed rat with a few ribs exposed through the gore of its ensnared innards. The homeless man shifted away from me, returning to his meal with a voracious fervor. I stood there, blinking, waiting for the image to dissipate like a fever dream hallucination. But the man remained, as did the rat. Yeah, no. Fuck this, I thought, hurrying inside so I could drop off the bags and leave. When I was back in the basement, I moved down the narrow hallway at an awkward angle to accommodate both trash bags and keep them from grazing the rough cement walls. Turning left, I stepped into the slaughter room and tossed the bags against the wall. I swung my head towards the butcher, ready to say my farewells and leave. He was slumped against a sink, bleeding profusely and gurgling on his own blood. Slowly, he craned his head in my direction. The right side of his face appeared normal, but he continued turning and turning until I saw the gash on his left cheek. The skin had been brutally sawed away with a serrated blade. Through the blood and bits of stringy flesh, I could see his rotted molars peering at me. I could see his tongue, what remained of it, writhing inside his mouth. He collapsed to the floor with a dull thud, grunting incoherently, babbling about something while waving his hands around in an erratic manner. I went to the medical kit against the opposite wall and ripped it free, sliding it across the floor to him. It was then that I noticed the table was empty. The blankets, quilts, and plastic wrap remained, along with a puddle of blood. But the girl was gone. Immediately, I drew the handgun from my holster on my waistband and flicked off the safety. Mr. Rousseau paid me handsomely for a great deal of duties, but this wasn't one of them. I backed out the slaughter room and started down the hall for the stairs, stopping short. At the end of the hallway was the girl. Her long black hair hung in front of her pale face. Blood dripped from the hole in her head, along with bits of bone and grey matter. In her right hand was a meat cleaver. In the other was a box cutter with the blade extended a few inches. She stood on a pair of stiff legs. The rigor mortis gave her an awkward gait, one that wouldn't allow her knees to bend as she lurched towards me. Every step creaked as her legs swung, almost throwing herself from one foot to the next. I lifted my pistol and fired. My ears rang with a piercing echo that shook my vision. Once it subsided and I blinked away the distortion, I saw that the bullet had struck her at the center of her chest. The girl paused in her pursuit, glanced down at the bullet wound, and lifted her head again. Bones audibly cracked with every movement. She gazed at me, annoyed but uninjured. Her eyes were wide, clouded with a cataractic milkiness. Then she started towards me again, flailing her arms, slashing wildly as steel blades shaved the concrete walls. Fear pulsed through my heart, radiating into my twisted bowels. You have got to be fucking kidding me. I aimed the barrel and fired until the gun clicked empty. Well, every bullet lodged inside her torso, but it did little other than stagger her for a moment. I ran in the opposite direction, following the hole deeper into the underground, through the shadows of the corridor into an open room where mutilated carcasses hung from the ceiling. They were covered in a white powder that I later learned was a mixture of quicklime and lye, used to decompose the bodies faster, along with baby powder to help conceal the scent of decay. And yet it lingered, permeating my nostrils and crawling down my throat. The corpses casually swayed on their hooks. Whatever flesh or muscle remained wriggled, festered by a colony of writhing maggots. There were tags clipped to each body, marking them as undesirable, with a brief explanation of why. Either they were too bitter, sour, unhygienic, or unqualified, whatever that meant. I didn't have time to read them all. The girl was right behind me, picking up speed and ferocity. I navigated the maze of corpses, pushing some aside in my desperate attempt to escape. Overhead lights flickered and buzzed, casting an array of shadows over the room. One of the corpses came loose and collapsed on top of me, knocking me to the ground. I scrambled out from underneath it and clambered to my feet, but by then the girl had caught up. She pounced at me, her weight knocking me back down to the ground. The cleaver's edge hacked at the stone beside my face. I seized her wrist and twisted it, but the girl didn't feel pain and refused to relinquish her tool. So I yanked and pulled and bashed her hand against the pavement until her fingers were too broken to clutch the handle. That small victory was swiftly disregarded when she came at me with the other hand, slashing my chest with her box cutter. She reeled back and stabbed the razor blade down. I lifted my left hand in front of my face, and the edge of her knife pierced through the flesh and muscle protruding out the other side, slowly descending closer and closer to my eye. A scream escaped my throat, visceral and raw. I grabbed the cleaver with my right hand and swung it into the side of her head with enough force to further erode her exposed scalp. I shoved her aside and scampered away like a wounded pup, stumbling back to my feet. The girl began to convulse and screech. Her voice echoed across the room, whirling around me in several different pitches and inflections. The sound of a dozen different people, all crying at once. Well, before I could convince myself otherwise, I grabbed the handle of the box cutter and yanked it free. My vision blurred around the edges, and a hot, fiery pain crept through the sinews of my left hand. The meat is spoiled and bitter. It's rotten, the girl cried in a voice that was not her own. The vessel must be fresh. The kill must be recent. No more decay, no more rot. We need to taste the blood while the heart still palpitates. The feast upon the soul while it still squirms and writhes from within those fleshy confines. She lumbered back onto her feet and pursued me once again. I continued through the room, coming to another dark corridor. But before my eyes could adjust, I was tumbling down a flight of stairs and rolling across a sloped cement floor. My limbs sprawled out around me, the box cutter now a few feet away. Oh, my bones ached, and my head was fuzzy with a probable concussion. My hand burned as a mixture of lye and quicklime from the corpses had spread into the wound. Searing pain was the only thing keeping me awake, keeping me alert. Above, I could hear the girl's strangled movements as she descended the stairs, twisting and turning her hips to accommodate her unbending limbs. Hastily, I crawled across the floor, retrieving the box cutter. Then I reached out into the darkness, searching for something stable. My fingers gripped a jagged rock edge, and I lifted myself to my feet, balancing against what appeared to be a cobblestone well. For a brief moment, I looked into the well, gazing down into the black abyss below. while the darkness swirled and churned, unending. A vortex trying to suck me in like an undertow, wishing to pull me down and consume every last morsel of my being. Then a rancid stench wafted over me, one that was unlike anything I'd smelled in my life. It funneled into my nose and mouth, clinging to my taste buds. It was thick and viscous, and felt like poison. Voices called out from the darkness, young and old, man and woman. Their whispers coalesced into a single chant. "Feed me." This went on and on. The voices called for more meat, more blood, more victims, all to satiate a hunger that could not be quelled. Then the girl was running at me, her hands stretched out before her, fingers like claws as they sunk into my neck. I jammed the box cutter's blade into her sternum, dragging and sawing the edge up her stomach, over her chest and into her throat. Guts and organs spilled out from the laceration, intestines draped across her lower half, an organic skirt of bloody ropes. The girl opened her mouth as if to bite me, but before she could, I planted my feet and spun, shoving her over the stone edge and down into the depths of the well. Her body crashed against the bottom with a loud thud. A cacophony of grunts escaped the darkness. Feet padded against stone. Then I heard the sound of chewing and gurgling. Something was eating, and when it had finally stopped, there came a howl. "No!" the voices screamed. "No more rot. No more sting." I backed away from the well, trying to keep the swarm of turmoil at bay, trying to keep myself upright and conscious. It isn't enough. The butcher stood at the bottom of the stairs. His cheek bulged with a mixture of stitches and cotton balls, fastened by a large bandage soaked red with blood. Their taste has developed. It's changed. They'll no longer accept the dead as tribute. They need more. "What the hell is down there?" I asked. The butcher shook his head. Sorrow filled his gaze. Exhaustion weighed upon his face. "Fulfill your duty. Feed the beast. Placate the darkness before it spills out onto the streets and floods the gutters. Before it bubbles to the top and consumes us all." "You're insane." "There's no room for sanity in a world like this. Not anymore." They lumbered towards me on heavy feet. In one hand was a meat tenderizer, and in the other was a long-bladed knife with a tapered end. His eyes were absent of emotion. I was no more than another carcass waiting to be carved. Part 5. The only viable solution is your meat. The answer is your blood. It's in your blood, the butcher rasped. Let them taste the metal. Let them feast upon the iron coursing through your veins. Let them devour the marrow of your bones, the protein of your muscles, the chemical stew within your brain. It's the only way to keep them pacified. He swung wide with the mallet. I hastily pulled away, feeling a rush of air brush against my face. Then he thrust toward my torso. Sidestepping, I swiped at him with the box cutter, slashing at his leather apron. The butcher growled through gritted teeth and slammed his forehead against mine. It sent me stumbling back against the well, almost falling in. As he brought his mallet down again, I rolled away, and it struck against the stones, sending flakes of dust and debris into the darkness. "Feed!" the voices chanted from the darkness. "Meat! Meat! Meat!" "Do you hear their cries?" the butcher asked, hacking at me with his knife. "They're older than either of us. Your life is nothing in comparison. A speck of sand in the hourglass. Many have died for less." I swung at him again with the box cutter, running the blade's edge down his arm in a curved arc. Blood seeped from the wound, splattering across the basement as he slashed with his knife. Steel glittered against the faint light coming from the room above. A shooting star in the night sky. When the butcher came at me with his mallet again, I leaned out of the way and seized him by the wrist, jamming the box cutter's edge into it, twisting and turning the blade and lacerating the tendons into a bloody mess. The butcher howled and dropped his mallet. Then suddenly his teeth were upon me, sinking into my ear and ripping away bits of flesh. I threw myself against him, and we both stumbled across the room, bumping into the well. He tried to maneuver his knife into my flank, but I slammed my knee against his forearm, crushing it against the well's rocky exterior. I drew my leg back and did this again and again until the bones crunched and his fingers released the handle. The knife clattered to the ground, but before I could seize it, he had his hand around my neck. "Feed us," the voices called. "Give us his meat." The butcher swung me around. My back slammed against the rim of the well. Sparks of pain shot up and down my spine, spreading across my shoulders. "All flesh is grass," the butcher hissed, spit flying with every word. "We're no more than lambs to the slaughter. And your time has come, boy. Your chance to feed them. Be their sustenance. Keep them at bay." Desperately, as black spotters flitted across my vision, I pounded my fist against the butcher's chest. I clawed at his neck, hooking my fingers into the collar of his shirt and stretching the fabric. My eyes fluttered, wishing to close, to dream one last dream before this nightmare finally came to an end. I could feel my strength abandoning me, feel my arms growing weak. Thoughts whirled through the recesses of my mind. Distant things with little stimulation. Images flashed before my eyes. I could see my father handing me the captive bolt gun for the first time, directing my hand so that the barrel pressed against the cow's upper skull, forcing my finger to pull the trigger. Suddenly, I could breathe again, but only for a moment. It was enough to send some of the black spots away. I had one of my hands wrapped around the butcher's mouth now, ripping through the bandage and stitches. My other hand grasped the side of his head, pressing against his ear and the greasy hair. My thumb dug into his eye socket, pushing deeper and deeper as blood pooled around it, slowly trickling down my hand. The butcher opened his mouth to scream, and when his teeth came back down, they clamped against the fingers of my left hand, biting through the skin, bone, and muscle. Oh, he yanked his head to the side, ripping away my pinky and ring finger. Oh, as painful as it was, this brought me more adrenaline, more flowing into my veins, more life into my body. With it came strength, enough to lift my arm and slam it against the pit of his elbow, breaking his hold on me. Then I grabbed the straps of his apron and pulled myself closer to him, close enough to bite down on his nose and rip it away, leaving behind a hole of mucus and cartilage. I could taste the sweat on his skin, the coppery tinge of his blood. First piece of meat I'd eaten since I'd left the farm. As the butcher wailed in anguish, I spit the blood into his eyes, blinding him, distracting him enough to slip away. I made it maybe 2 steps before he had me by the collar of my jacket. At that moment I thought, fuck it. If I was to be meat, to be a sacrifice, might as well do it with some company. He pulled me back and I thrust myself against him. Together we went over the well's edge, plummeting 10, maybe 15 feet into darkness. His body made contact with the ground, cushioning my descent to some degree. When I came to, I was at the bottom of the well, staring at a cove of broken stone filled with scraps of clothes and discarded bones. Ahead, concealed in the shadows, was an irregular mass. I blinked away the fog over my eyes, waiting for them to adjust. That's when I saw it. A tangle of rotted corpses stitched together by threads of spewing black membrane. There were over 100 different eyes grafted to the entity, and each one gazed upon me, pupils dilating with fervent curiosity. An animal still trying to decide whether it should pounce or not. My instincts kicked in, and I stumbled to my feet, leaning against the nearest wall for support while pain gradually coursed through me. The entity propelled itself forward. I raised my right hand and yelled, "Wait!" The entity came to a halt, the darkness within stirring impatiently. "You need me." The wreath of bodies and disjointed limbs began to laugh. "Need you?" "Yeah." I pointed at the butcher, lying broken and unconscious. "He's of no use to you now. You need someone to acquire your meals, to feed you. Maybe we'll just escape and feed on everyone. You could do that, but you haven't yet. I think you know why. I was talking out of my ass, grasping at every last rational thought still available. Anything and everything to make sense of this nonsense. Like if you were going to go topside, there'd be no one to stop you from feasting upon every last living organism, I said. You'd consume the whole globe, and then there'd be nothing left. No more reproduction, no more sacrifices, no more meat. And eventually you'd starve. You'd be stuck on an empty planet with nothing to satiate your hunger. Look, whether you care to admit it or not, you need temperance, I continued. You need someone to control your appetite. I could do that for you, but he can't. Not anymore. The assembly considered this quietly. Some whispered among themselves, their lips pulled back into a snarl as if it were a heated debate. I watched with morbid fascination as the collection conferred. Couldn't tell whether it was a single mind entity or multiple consciousnesses stitched together as one. It all felt like a dream that I may never wake from. We want only fresh meat, the entity resolved. No more rot, no more decay. I was desperate to escape, desperate to hold on to this frail existence we call life, and so I agreed. If that's your prerogative, then fine, I can make it happen. I need your help to get out of here. From there, I'll handle the rest. That's when the butcher stirred from his slumber. His eyes rapidly blinked away the vague remnants of unconsciousness. He mumbled under his breath, but before I could make sense of his words, the creature was upon him, pulling him into their mixture of darkness and death. He disappeared into the mass, screaming as the black mucus prized away flesh from the bone, dissolving him no differently than stomach acid. And like that, the butcher was gone. Then the entity was upon me. Several different arms seized my body, hoisting me into the air. I stifled a yelp between clenched teeth, thinking they'd pull me in as well. But instead, they began to scale the cobblestone walls of the well, lifting me out from below and spitting me back onto the basement floor. They paused at the rim, peering over the rocky lip. We expect great things from you, Butcher. We want sustenance twice every moon cycle. If you fail to uphold your end of the deal, we will not forgive. They then began to descend, sinking back into the abyss. Their voices echoed from within. And we never forget. I lied there for a while. Couldn't say how long. Time itself seemed frozen. Inside that dank, dark basement, reality had become a distant concern. Society had lost any sense of importance. All those bills and debts and tragic things that come as a natural occurrence of existence were suddenly meaningless. Eventually I picked myself up and sauntered through the underground. I stopped inside the slaughter room to retrieve the med kit from the floor and set it on the counter. I turned on the tap and rinsed my wounds before applying a fair dose of antiseptic solution. It hissed and bubbled with a caustic sting. As tears rolled down my cheeks, I dressed my wounds, applying bandages and sutures where possible. My time at the farm had prepared me in ways I'd never expected. When all was said and done, I took a handful of aspirin, but they did little to numb the pain. Going upstairs and out to the parking lot, I sat in my car and stared at the butcher shop through the rain-streaked windshield. A scream ripped at my throat, but I suppressed it with a fair helping of gin and enough cigarettes to give me a headache. My phone began ringing, so I answered it. You had that taken care of? Troy asked. All good on my end. My voice was frail, barely coherent. What about you? Just finishing up here. It's about as clean as it'll ever get. Good, great. I'll talk to you later. I hung up and started dialing another number. Rousseau answered after the third ring, but I spoke first. Your incident has been handled, but there were some issues along the way that'll need to be seen to. I didn't tell him everything because, well, why would I? A hastily explained fabrication sufficed. I told him the butcher had gone mad and attacked me. In the end, I was forced to kill him, but his body, along with the girl, had been disposed of. Then I said something that surprised him, something he didn't quite know how to respond to. The, shop will be needing a new butcher. I waited a beat, letting it register before adding, and I'd like to apply for the position. With Russo's help, including bribes to city officials and greasing palms of local inspectors, I secured the shop. I've since become the new owner, the sole employee, the butcher on Barker Street. I feed the beast harboring in the belly of the city every full moon, so that no one else has to. I accept the deteriorated corpses of Russo's victims, of everyone's victims, and carve them into marketable products to be exchanged for tender. Usually money, but in some cases, favors or feasible sacrifices. Twice a month, I secure a tribute. Someone who won't be missed. Someone the world can forget. Well, it isn't hard to find them. You don't have to look very far. The city is full of inconsequential people. I guess that's a relative affair, though, because in comparison to what lies beneath the surface, none of us truly matter. We are an ignorant society, one composed of distracted individuals placidly going about their lives with little regard for the corruption around them. We're all just servants to a system much larger than ourselves, cogs in a machine dominated and operated by shadows. The reach of its corruption spreads wide and far. It sinks its teeth into every establishment, whether we notice it or not. We try to ignore it, try to blind ourselves through menial means such as alcohol or narcotics or reading or any other form of entertainment. But the truth is there. It's always been there. Between the threads of our own self-sewn veils, we are sustenance to satiate the hungry. Some of us serve, some of us eat. But in the end, we all become no more than meat. Well, be honest with me, my dear friends. You didn't see that coming, did you? Started out as something and turned into something completely different halfway through. Yeah, that one was very entertaining. A little bit more bloodthirsty and gory than I usually read, but hey, I know you guys can deal with it every now and again. Well, that was a bizarre story, wasn't it? What did you think of it? Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Now, that was something of a treat here on Wednesday, then on Thursday, back over for another podcast. Oof. Then Friday back here. Oh, my week is just full already. Still love doing this for you all, though, and I know that you still appreciate the stories. So, my dear friends, you'll sleep well, and remember, it's just a story, isn't it? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. What begins as an ordinary day in the Colosseum quickly descends into unimaginable horror when a mysterious plague erupts among the crowds, transforming citizens and warriors alike into bloodthirsty horrors. As panic spreads through the heart of the Empire, a gladiator and 2 unlikely companions must battle their way through collapsing streets, ancient tunnels, and a city consumed by chaos. You liking the sound of this? Well, survival proves far more difficult than escaping Rome itself. Beyond the burning gates lies a far darker revelation, one that suggests the nightmare is only beginning. Zombie outbreak, ancient Rome. by Augustus Cordoba. Part 1. A day in the Ludus Magnus always began the same way. Long before sunrise painted the rooftops of Rome gold, the sharp crack of a trainer's staff against the stone walls dragged the gladiators from uneasy sleep. The air inside the barracks was thick with sweat oil and the sour smell of old blood that never truly washed away. Men rose silently from their straw mattresses, rubbing bruised ribs and stiff shoulders, already exhausted before the day had even started. Outside in the training yard, torches flickered against the towering walls of the school, and beyond them came the distant roar of the city waking up. Merchants shouting, wheels rattling over cobblestones, dogs barking in narrow streets. But inside the Ludus Magnus, there was only discipline. Training began immediately. Wooden swords slammed against shields until hands blistered and split open. Trainers barked orders in rough Latin, pacing like wolves among the fighters. Retired gladiators, scarred and half limping, demonstrated how to kill efficiently, how to entertain a crowd, and, most importantly, how not to die. Some men trained for speed, others for brute force, each style designed for the arena's spectacle. Between drills, the gladiators were fed thick barley porridge, beans, and watered wine, cheap fuel for expensive entertainment. Every man understood the truth of the place. The Ludus Magnus was not simply a school. It was a machine built to turn prisoners, slaves, and condemned men into living weapons for the amusement of Rome. Old scars faded to yellow. Fresh ones waited just around the corner. In the arena, pain was proof your heart was still beating. Anything beyond that belonged to the gods. I swung my legs off the straw pallet as the iron-bound door groaned open. The corridor outside lay in shadow, thick with the smell of sweat, lamp oil, and dust baked beneath the relentless Roman sun. Around me, other gladiators emerged from their cells. We all wore the same look. Exhausted, hungry, and ready. The routine kept us sane. Every day followed the same pattern. Wake, train, eat, and fight when ordered. It was a hard life, but there was comfort in knowing exactly what misery awaited you. The training yard was already alive with movement. Sand churned beneath countless feet. Dark stains marked the ground where blood had dried into the earth weeks or even months before. The place never forgot a fight. The morning air still carried a hint of coolness, but it wouldn't last. For now, barked the lanista, his voice rough enough to strip paint from stone. Shield drills, then sparring. I picked up my practice shield. The weight settled against my arm naturally. It was familiar, reliable, like a piece of my own body even. My partner was Gaius, broad as an ox, loud enough to wake the dead. He somehow managed to steal extra food every day without getting caught. Now, in a place where trust was rarer than gold, he was one of the few men I would turn my back on. We raised our shields and began circling. Gaius smirked. You look terrible. I slept terribly. Looks like you slept under a wagon. Would have been softer. He laughed. We traded slow practice blows. Wood cracked against wood. Shields slammed together. Sand scraped beneath our sandals. And for a little while, everything felt normal. Not good, not pleasant, but normal. Then the gates at the far end of the yard crashed open. The sound cut through the training ground like a sword stroke. Every head turned. Two guards hurried inside, dragging a slave between them. The man looked barely conscious. His body was shaking violently, and his eyes darted in every direction as if he were trapped inside a nightmare no one else could see. And his skin was as pale as carved marble. One of the guards wiped blood from his forearm onto his tunic and cursed under his breath. Another one from the slums. The second guard spat into the sand. Yeah, some lunatic bit him. I lowered my shield. Bit him, I muttered. Gaius shrugged. Word is there's a sickness spreading. Makes people go mad. Well, madmen weren't exactly unusual in Rome. Starvation made men savage. So did fear. So did cruelty. The empire was full of broken people. But something about the guards bothered me. Their faces, their voices. These were men who carried spears for a living, men who had seen riots, executions, and battlefield corpses. Yet they looked frightened. Not nervous, and not concerned, no. They were afraid. The kind of fear soldiers tried to bury beneath hard expressions and discipline. Well, training continued, but the yard had changed. I mean, nobody said it aloud. Nobody needed to. Every glance drifted toward the infirmary where the slave had been taken. Every conversation became quieter. A cold feeling settled somewhere deep inside me. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like standing on a shoreline moments before a storm reaches land. The sky still looks clear, but something dark is already moving toward you. When sparring resumed, the feeling only got worse. Varro arrived late, and that alone was unusual. I mean, the man was never late. He staggered into the yard, looking as though he'd crawled out of a grave. And his hands trembled. Sweat soaked his tunic despite the cool morning air. Every movement seemed delayed, as though his body no longer obeyed him properly. Sinister frowned. Varro. No response. You look half dead. Too much wine last night? Still nothing. Varro slowly raised his wooden practice sword. But his eyes, they were clouded, empty, like there was nobody behind them. Sinister pointed toward me. Right, you're with him. Well, I stepped forward reluctantly. Varro shuffled closer. We began to circle, as we normally would. His breathing sounded terrible, wet, ragged. You could hear it over the noise of the entire training yard. Then he attacked. The swing was sloppy, slow, easy to read. I blocked it without effort. But as our weapons met, a chill ran through me. There was something behind this clumsiness, something ugly and something hungry. Not the hunger of a gladiator waiting for breakfast, no. Something deeper and more desperate. I knocked his sword aside and backed away. Every instinct suddenly screaming that the man standing in front of me was no longer entirely himself. Varro, stop. You're sick. The words barely left my mouth before he answered with a guttural hiss. Spit sprayed from beneath clenched teeth. His eyes. The black centers had swallowed almost everything, leaving him looking less like a man and more like a starving beast. Then he charged. No stance, no training, no discipline. Just violence. He came at me with blind fury, swinging wildly. I drove my shield forward and smashed it into his chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into the sand. The entire yard erupted. Trainers sprinted toward him. Two of them seized his arms, but Varro fought like a cornered animal. He twisted, kicked, and snapped his jaws at anyone who came close. His teeth clicked shut inches from a trainer's face. Gods above! Hold him! Someone shouted. He's burning up! Sinister approached, though not too closely. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw caution in the old man's eyes. Get him to the infirmary, he ordered. Now! It took 4 men to drag Varro away. As they hauled him across the training ground, his head suddenly jerked backward. His gaze locked onto mine. For a single heartbeat, everything else disappeared. I wasn't looking at a sick man. I wasn't looking at a fever victim. Whatever stared back at me felt hollow, just empty, like something important had already left him, leaving him only a shell. And then he opened his mouth and screamed. The sound froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't human, well, not completely. The cry echoed off the stone walls long after they dragged him from sight. Something changed in the yard after that. The routine was shattered. Nobody returned to training properly. Men swung swords and raised shields because they were ordered to, but their minds were elsewhere. Mine certainly was. I couldn't explain it, but I felt something gathering beyond the horizon, like thunder hidden behind clear skies. Like an unseen enemy marching closer with every passing moment. For the first time in my life, Rome itself felt vulnerable. The Empire ruled half the known world, its legions crushed kingdoms, its roads stretched further than men would ever travel. Yet suddenly it seemed fragile, as if everything could come apart from something as small as a bite. By midday, the sun hammered down on the Colosseum. Heat rolled off the stone in shimmering waves. Tens of thousands packed the stands above, screaming for blood, glory, and death. The crowd's roar flowed through the structure like a living thing. I'd fought in that arena many times. I'd walked through those tunnels knowing I might never walk back out. But today felt different. It was like the gods were watching in silence, waiting for something terrible to begin. We sat beneath the arena in the staging chambers. Gladiators filled the benches, some adjusted armor straps, others sharpened blades or paced restless circles through the dim corridors. Chains rattled somewhere in the darkness. Animals snarled behind iron bars. The smell of sweat, old blood, and fear hung thick in the stale underground air. Gaius nudged my shoulder. Strange day. You noticed? Hard not to. Trainers whispering, guards running around like they've seen ghosts. I leaned against the wall. I saw Varro taken away. Gaius frowned. Bad? Worse, he looked possessed. Possessed or drunk. Despite everything, he tried to grin. Either way, I hope he recovers. He still owes me 5 coins. Well, the joke landed like a stone. Neither of us laughed. Then a low horn sounded somewhere above. The crowd exploded into cheers. Another fight had ended. The guard hurried through the tunnel nearby. His face looked pale beneath his helmet. He muttered something under his breath as he passed. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped, turned around and rushed back. He whispered urgently to another guard, and both men immediately looked toward us. Then they hurried away. What's going on? Someone called, but nobody answered. A few moments later, a heavy gate at the far end of the passage crashed open. Several guards stumbled inside, dragging a prisoner bound with ropes. Oh, the man fought with terrifying strength. Blood covered his face and stained his chest. His wrists were raw and bleeding where he'd strained against the bindings. Another biter, one of the guards growled. He attacked a handler in the holding pens. Another guard spat. Tore a chunk right out of his arm. Nearly killed him. The prisoner thrashed violently. When he turned his head, I saw his eyes. Oof, the same eyes. The same look Varro had worn. Wide, empty, and hungry. The guards cursed as they dragged him farther down the corridor. And then, everything went wrong. The prisoner suddenly exploded into motion. Oh, he lunged, but before anyone could react, his teeth had sunk deep into a guard's forearm. The scream that followed echoed through the tunnel. The prisoner ripped backward and a piece of flesh came away with him. Blood splashed across the stone floor. The other guards immediately slammed the prisoner's head against a pillar, once, twice, and then again. The crack echoed through the corridor. I stood frozen. The guard staggered backward, clutching his ruined arm. His face lost all color. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. The other guards rushed to help, shouting for medics, but their voices were filled with concern. No, not concern. Filled with fear. Not fear of the prisoner, fear of him. The bitten man. That's when I understood whatever this was, it spread through the bite. And that realization hit me like a hammer. Only seconds passed, maybe less. Then the wounded guard suddenly convulsed. His entire body locked up. His back arched so sharply, I thought his spine might snap. And then he collapsed. Still, completely still. And the corridor fell silent. One guard slowly knelt beside him. "Marcus," he whispered. No response. "Marcus, answer me." Suddenly Marcus's eyes flew open and a terrible scream ripped from his throat. He launched himself at the nearest man with impossible speed. Well, someone grabbed for him, someone else shouted for help. It didn't matter. Marcus hit the guard like a wild animal. Before anyone else could pull him away, he had torn into the man's throat and blood sprayed across the tunnel walls. Well, the scream became a gurgle, and the entire underground arena descended into chaos. The tunnel exploded into madness. Gladiators stumbled over one another trying to get away. Men who had spent years facing death in the arena suddenly looked terrified. Some snatched up weapons meant for the games. Guards ripped swords from their scabbards. Orders were shouted. Warnings were ignored. People fell. Part 2. Marcus tore through anyone unlucky enough to stand within reach. The fever that had taken him had turned him into something else entirely. Oh, he moved with savage speed, faster than any dying man had a right to move. Then something even worse happened. The first prisoner, the one whose skull had been smashed against the pillar, started to twitch. For a moment nobody moved, and then he sat upright. The side of his head was caved in, blood covered his face. By every law of nature and every law of Rome, he should be dead. Instead he rose to his feet. The sight froze the corridor. Even the guards hesitated. That single moment of disbelief would kill them. The prisoner launched himself forward, his hands locked onto one guard's leg while his teeth sank into another's arm. He dragged both men down with horrifying strength. Their screams echoed through the tunnel. I grabbed Gaius by the forearm. "Come on, we move now." Well, there was no argument. We ran. The corridor became a stampede. Gladiator slaves, trainers and guards all fought their way toward the nearest exit. Men shoved each other aside. Others were trampled beneath the crowd. Behind us came the sounds I'll never forget. Screaming, steel striking bone, the wet crunch of flesh being torn apart. The noises followed us all the way to the arena entrance. We burst out into daylight. The sun hit us like a hammer. The arena floor glowed beneath the midday sky. Above us, tens of thousands of Romans packed the stands, cheering and chanting for bloodshed they believed was part of the spectacle. They had no idea what was climbing out of the darkness below. A pair of guards rushed to seal the gate behind us. The massive doors had almost closed when something slammed into them from inside. The impact shook the hinges. Another strike followed, and then another. The iron fittings bent, wood splintered, and the gate burst apart. The first infected charged onto the sand. The crowd fell silent. The thing sprinted across the arena in a jerking, unnatural run, foam dripping from its mouth. Its limbs moved like they belonged to a puppet with broken strings. Some spectators laughed. They thought it was part of the entertainment. Some even applauded. Then the infected vaulted into the front rows. His teeth buried themselves in a woman's face, and the laughter died instantly, screams replacing it. Panic swept through the Colosseum faster than fire through dry grass. People surged toward the exits. Others were knocked down and trampled. Everywhere I looked, more infected were appearing. Each bite created another. Each victim became a new attacker. The plague spread through the crowd in moments. More infected poured from the shattered tunnel gates. One crashed into a man carrying a child. Another dragged a food seller over a railing and disappeared with him into the chaos below. Bodies tumbled from the stone seating. Some Romans ran, some stood frozen in disbelief. At most, never got the chance to escape. Gaius and I sprinted along the arena wall. Ahead, the entrance to the gladiator barracks stood open. A guard waved frantically. "Inside! Move!" Survivors flooded toward him. Behind us, the infected came in waves. "Close it!" the guard screamed. "Close the damned gate!" We slipped through the doorway, and the instant we crossed the threshold, the guard threw his weight against the heavy wooden gate. Others joined him, and the doors slammed shut. A heartbeat later, something hit them from the outside. Then another impact, and another. The infected hurled themselves against the wood, snarling and clawing like rabid wolves. The entire frame shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Gaius bent over, sucking in air. What in Hades is happening? I stared at the trembling gate, at the blood smeared across my arms, at the distant screams rolling through the Colosseum above us. Oh, I don't know. The words tasted bitter. But I think Rome is dying. And somehow I knew the nightmare had only begun. The gate shuddered again, and the wooden support beams groaned under the strain. Each impact sounded like bones cracking beneath a hammer. The entrance hall was filled with survivors, gladiators, handlers, stable workers, arena guards. A handful of wounded men dragged in from the sand. And every face carried the same expression. Disbelief fighting a losing battle against reality. Gaius planted his shoulder against the gate. They'll break through. Not yet. I wasn't convinced of my own answer. Go on, help me reinforce it. We grabbed a weapons rack and shoved it against the doors. Others joined in. A heavy storage crate followed. Then benches, anything we could move. Men pressed their bodies against the barricade. The infected struck again, and the entire structure lurched inward. One guard lost his footing and crashed to the floor. "Oh, they're too strong," he gasped. "By Jupiter, they're as strong as demons." Before anyone could answer, a scream rang out somewhere deeper inside the barracks. Everyone froze. A second scream followed, and then came a sound that turned my blood cold. The wet, tearing noise of flesh being ripped apart. Silence swept across the hall. For one brief heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody breathed. And then the truth settled over us. The infection wasn't outside anymore. No, it was already inside. Panic tore through the room. The barracks stretched through a maze of corridors and chambers, armories packed with weapons, sleeping quarters lined with bunks, training halls and storage rooms connected by narrow passageways. 100 places to hide, 100 places to die. If the infected had found another way in, then we weren't defending a fortress. We were trapped inside one. Caught between two packs of monsters closing in from opposite directions. Well, I drew my sword. We have to move. Move. Now. The words had barely left my mouth when a figure staggered into the corridor. And I recognized him instantly. Aquila, one of the trainers. Oh, the man looked as if he'd walked through a battlefield. Blood streamed down his arm, dripping onto the stone floor. His face had gone the color of old parchment. He stumbled towards us. "Something," he gasped, and his voice cracked. "Something bit me." He swayed where he stood. "It came from the upper dormitories. The slaves up there." That sentence died with him. His eyes rolled back until only the white showed. Then the convulsion started. "Get back!" I shouted. His entire body had locked up. A horrible cracking sound echoed through the hall. His spine bent at an angle no living man should survive. Bones popped beneath his skin like timber splitting under a carpenter's hammer. And Aquila collapsed to his knees. For a heartbeat, he was motionless. And then he exploded forward. The roar that came from his throat was not human. He crashed into the nearest guard and buried his teeth deep in the man's neck. Blood splashed across the wall in a crimson arc. Go! Go! I grabbed Gaius and shoved him toward a side passage. We can't hold them back. Nobody could. The infection was spreading faster than panic. We sprinted through the barracks. Screams echoed through every corridor. Boots thundered across stone floors. Somewhere nearby, people were dying. At every turn, things got worse. A handler disappeared into a doorway, dragged screaming into the darkness. The slave tore free from his restraints, already twitching and snarling as the sickness consumed him. A guard drove a spear through an infected man's chest, but the creature barely noticed. It just kept on advancing with the shaft sticking through its body until another soldier buried an axe in its skull. Only then did it stop moving. That's when I understood. The body didn't matter, but the head did. Anything else was useless. We reached the armory and slammed the iron gate shut behind us. The heavy metal rattled in its frame. Gaia staggered toward a weapons rack and snatched up a gladius. His breathing was ragged. The gods are punishing us. I shook my head. No. I listened to the chaos outside then. This is worse than that. Through the iron bars, shadows moved in the corridor. Human shapes, some limped, some twitched, some jerked their heads in unnatural motions. None of them looked right. None of them looked alive. Look, we can't stay here, I said quietly, and Gaius nodded. Then where do we go? The Eastern Service exit. He frowned. Well, the one behind the Colosseum. Yes, if the streets aren't overrun yet, we might be able to. But a deafening crash interrupted me. Something slammed into the gate, and the iron bars shook violently. Hands shot through the gaps, bloody fingers clawed at the air, a ruined face pressed against the metal. Its skin hung in strips, fresh blood coated its mouth. Its eyes were wide with mindless hunger. Another infected threw itself against the bars, and then another. Within seconds, the entire gate rattled beneath a mass of grasping hands and snapping teeth. Too many, Gaius muttered. He tightened his grip on his sword. We'll never force our way through that. I scanned the room. Weapons lined the walls. Shields stacked in rows, spears, helmets, armor. Then I spotted it. A narrow stone vent built high into the far wall, large enough for a man to crawl through. Right, there. I pointed. Gaius followed my gaze, and his expression darkened. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? That leads to the beast passages. The tunnels beneath the arena. The ones they use for lions. And tigers. And bears. Yes. He stared at me. I shrugged. Well, they lead outside the arena grounds. A violent growl echoed from the gate. One infected bit down on the iron bars so hard its teeth shattered. But the creature didn't seem to notice. Oh, Gaius swore. Wonderful. Another impact shook the room. Fine, but if a starving lion eats me, I'm coming back to haunt you. Get in line. We crossed the armory. I wedged my shield beneath the vent cover and heaved upward. The stone grate shifted with a grinding scrape. Cool, stale air drifted out from the darkness beyond. The passage disappeared into blackness. Behind us, the gate shuddered again. Metal groaned. One of the hinges began to bend. Come on, hurry. Gaius climbed in first, muttering curses the entire way. I followed close behind. As soon as I was through, I pulled the cover back into place. A second later, a tremendous crash echoed from the armory. The gate had finally given way. The infected were inside. Darkness swallowed us before they could find the vent. For the first time since this nightmare began, the screams seemed distant, muted. We were still alive, and that alone felt like a victory. Ahead waited darkness, uncertainty, and whatever prowled the beast tunnels beneath Rome's greatest arena. It was still better than staying behind. Part 3. The passage sloped downward before twisting upward again. It wound beneath the Colosseum like the veins of some giant creature buried beneath the city. The air was damp and heavy, and the smell of old blood lingered everywhere. Generations of animals had passed through these tunnels on their way to slaughter, and the stones remembered. Every scrape of our sandals echoed around us. Every breath sounded too loud. After a while, Gaius spoke. His voice barely rose above a whisper, though. If something jumps out at us in here, I'm swinging first and asking questions later. Try not to kill me. No promises. I'd rather not survive the plague just to die by your sword. Gaius let out a low snort. Survive? Look around. His voice echoed softly through the darkness. Nothing about today feels like survival. Well, I couldn't argue with that. We pushed deeper into the tunnel until it widened enough for us to crouch instead of crawl. Thin shafts of daylight filtered through iron grates overhead. Beyond them came distant sounds from above. Screams, hundreds of them. The dying voice of the Colosseum, the greatest arena in Rome, had become a slaughterhouse. Somewhere overhead, thousands of people were still being hunted. I swallowed hard and kept moving. God, Rome has lost its mind. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Gaius shook his head as we pushed deeper into the darkness beneath the Colosseum. No, no. His voice echoed softly off the damp stone. We've seen madness before. Riots, civil wars, drunken mobs tearing each other apart in the streets. He glanced back toward the distant screams above us. This is something else. I couldn't argue. The tunnel split ahead. One passage climbed sharply upward, disappearing toward the animal holding chambers where Rome kept its imported killers before the games. The other curved away into darkness, carrying a faint current of fresh air. I pointed. Left. The exit. Yeah, the exit. Gaius nodded, but his eyes lingered on the upward tunnel. You think the beasts are still locked up? I thought of the chaos spreading through the arena. Broken gates, dead handlers, panicked crowds. Oh, I hope so. Neither of us sounded convinced in our arguments, though. We turned left and kept moving. For a while, the only sounds were our breathing and the scrape of sandals on stone. And then something growled. The noise rolled through the darkness behind us, low, deep, and predatory. Both of us froze. Gaius slowly turned his head. That wasn't one of those things, was it? I listened. Another growl rumbled through the passage. No. My grip tightened on my shield. No, that wasn't human. Movement stirred at the far end of the tunnel. A shape, large, close to the ground. And then came the unmistakable sound of claws clicking against stone. Slowly at first, and then faster. Gaius swallowed. Lion. The word hung in the darkness. I shifted my stance instinctively. Well, we can't fight it in here. No. The clicking became pounding. The animal had started running. Right, we run. And that was all the discussion we needed. Oh, we bolted. The tunnel blurred around us. The lion roared. The sound hit like a physical blow, shaking dust from the ceiling overhead. Its paws were hammering against the stone floor. Closer, much closer, far too fast. Move, Gaius shouted. Ahead, daylight appeared. A thin beam of sunlight spilled through a rusted iron grate built into the wall. A drainage outlet. Not an entrance, and not an exit designed for people. Just a narrow opening leading toward the outer training grounds. Normally it would have been useless, but today it was everything. "Right, down," I yelled. I hit the ground first. My shoulder slammed into the grate. Oh, the metal shrieked. The bars bent outward. Gaius crashed into me an instant later, adding his weight. Rust gave way, and the iron snapped free. We burst through the opening and tumbled into daylight. Dry grass scraped my arms as I rolled. For a moment, all I saw was blue sky. Then I scrambled upright. Behind us, the lion had reached the opening. And the beast hit the stone with enough force to crack it, and dust exploded outward. A massive paw shot through the gap. Claws slashed the air inches from my face, and I stumbled backward. The lion roared again, trapped by an opening too narrow for its body. Gaius stared at it. His face had gone pale. God, I'd rather fight 10 infected. Oh, don't say that. What? The gods might hear you. For once, he didn't laugh. We turned toward the training grounds then, and the sight waiting for us was almost worse. The area should have been crowded, gladiators drilling in the sand, handlers shouting orders, slaves hauling equipment. Instead, silence hung over the grounds like a funeral shroud, and the emptiness was strange, wrong. Then came the moans. Shapes emerged from behind wooden practice dummies and overturned weapon racks. The infected, dozens of them. Some still wore pieces of gladiator armor. Others staggered forward half naked, their skin smeared with drying blood. But every face carried the same look, that same hollow hunger. The same dead eyes I'd seen in Varro, in Marcus, in every nightmare that had followed. Gaius raised his gladius. "Come on, we go round. No time." I pointed toward the northern wall. Beyond it lay the streets of Rome. If we reach the gate, we can make it for the Tiber. Maybe the river would offer safety. Well, maybe nowhere would. But it was still better than standing still. We started moving carefully, slowly, trying not to attract attention. And for a few precious moments, it worked. Then one of them noticed us. A slave boy, no older than 12. His arm hung broken at a sickening angle. The infection had twisted him into something unrecognizable. His head jerked toward us, and he sniffed the air, and then he screamed. The sound echoed around the entire training ground. Every infected turned, every single one. My stomach dropped. Well, Gaius didn't hesitate, though. "Run," he said, "run." We sprinted, and the field erupted behind us. The infected charged, bodies crashed through practice dummies, weapons scattered across the dirt. Their snarls filled the air. Oh, they were fast, far faster than they had any right to be. One launched itself toward me. I felt its fingers brush my shoulder, spun and drove my shield into its skull. The impact cracked bone, and the creature collapsed, twitching violently. But still it tried to rise. Gaius stepped in and buried his blade through its eye. Only then did it stop moving. He yanked the sword free. "Oh, they're too fast." His breathing came in ragged bursts. "We can't outrun all of them." He was right. More infected appeared ahead. Others emerged from behind the barracks. The circle was closing. Their feet pounded the earth, and their growls echoed from every direction. Behind us, the trapped lion roared again from beneath the arena. The sound rolled across the grounds like thunder. Every escape route seemed to be disappearing. And then a voice shouted, "Over here!" I turned. A group of survivors stood atop a stack of supply crates near the northern wall. 2 arena handlers, a young woman gripping a spear, and one man I recognized immediately, Rufinus, a veteran of more than 100 arena fights. God, his face was a map of old scars, but if anyone in Rome knew how to survive impossible odds, it was him. He tossed down a rope. "Here, climb." No one needed to be told twice. Gaius grabbed it and hauled himself upward with surprising speed. I reached for the rope next, and then something squeezed my ankle. The force yanked my leg out from under me, and I hit the ground hard enough to drive the breath from my lungs. An infected slave had crawled through the dirt and locked both hands around my leg, and its jaw snapped wildly. Another infected staggered toward me from behind. I kicked, but the creature held on. His teeth came within inches of my calf. "Hold on," Gaius shouted. He dropped to his stomach and reached down. His hand caught my forearm, and I grabbed hold. And I raised my free foot and slammed my heel into the infected skull. Once, the creature snarled. Twice, bone began to crack. A third strike shattered something inside its head. And the creature's grip finally loosened. Gaius hauled me upward with every ounce of strength he had left. I scrambled for the top of the crate stack, and then disaster struck. An infected lunged from below and caught Gaius before he could pull himself clear. It sank his teeth deep into his shin. The scream that tore out of him cut through every other sound. For a moment I froze. "Gaius!" His hands trembled, but he refused to let go of my arm. "Don't stop," he growled through clenched teeth. "Don't you dare stop." Blood poured down his leg, dark and steady. The infected hung from him like a starving wolf refusing to release its prey. Then Rufinus stepped forward. One swing. The axe crashed into the creature's skull, and it dropped instantly. Gaius collapsed onto the crates. His entire body shook. I dropped beside him as the others dragged us further from the edge. His breathing was coming in short, painful bursts now. Every inhale sounded like work, every exhale sounded worse. His eyes found mine then. "Brother." The word barely escaped his lips. "No, no." I grabbed his shoulder. "Save your strength." His hand shot out and seized the front of my tunic. The grip was surprisingly strong, desperate. "You know what happens." The words were little more than a whisper now. I looked down at the wound. I already knew. We all did. "Don't let me become one of them." His voice cracked. For a moment neither of us spoke. Below, the infected clawed at the crates, and their snarls rose from the ground like a chorus from the underworld. Across the city, screams echoed through the streets of Rome. The Empire was collapsing around us. I couldn't answer him. Couldn't force the words out because, deep down, I knew the truth. The price of surviving this nightmare had already come due. The crate stack groaned beneath our weight. Every impact from below rattled the wood, and the infected slammed themselves against the supports with mindless determination. Dozens of them, maybe more. The young woman with the spear stood at the edge, stabbing downward whenever one climbed too high. Blood spattered her arms, and her expression never changed, never wavered. Rufinus surveyed the streets beyond the northern wall. Then he pointed. "Right, we jump." He nodded toward the far side. "The street's clear enough." "Clear enough," Gaius muttered, and he laughed once, a weak, bitter sound. His face had gone pale beneath the dirt and blood, and sweat soaked his skin. The infection was already working through him. I crouched beside him. "Look, we'll find help." The look he gave me hit harder than any sword. He knew, I knew. "No one lasts forever, brother." I looked away then. Rufinus tossed me a short sword. I caught it automatically. "Come on, move," the veteran growled. "Before they come around the other side." And he was right. The infection was spreading through Rome like wildfire, carried on a summer wind. Every moment we stayed here made escape less likely. The handlers jumped first. They hit the dirt below and rolled. The woman followed a heartbeat later. Then Rufinus turned to me. "Go." I grabbed Gaius's arm. "I'll help you. You'll carry me." He winced as another wave of pain shot through his leg. "We'll both die." No. "Yes." His voice was firm, certain, and I hated it. I hated that he was right. For a moment we stared at one another. Then he forced a grin. The same grin I'd seen before countless arena fights. Half mockery, half courage. The grin of a man staring death in the face and refusing to blink. "Go." He jerked his head toward the wall. "I'll be right behind you." Didn't believe him for a heartbeat. Not one. But the infected were already climbing the far side of the training grounds. I could see them hauling themselves over wooden structures, their twisted silhouettes growing larger and closer. Time was tightening around us like an executioner's rope. And so, I jumped. God, the landing rattled every bone in my body. Rufinus grabbed my arm before I could stumble. "Your friend?" Coming. The lie left my mouth before I could stop it. A moment later, Gaius dropped from above. He landed badly. His wounded leg folded beneath him. The scream that followed made my stomach twist. The woman rushed forward and helped drag him upright, while Rufinus stepped between us and the approaching infected. "Run," he said, and we ran. The alley beside the Colosseum stretched ahead like a canyon of stone. Gaius limped between me and the spearwoman. God, every step looked agonizing, every breath came out ragged and uneven. Behind us, the infected poured through the broken beast tunnel exit. Their shrieks echoed through the ancient stone. Above the rooftops, smoke drifted into the sky. Rome was dying, and it was happening faster than anyone could stop.